Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never thought an old wooden marionette could make me lose sleep. I used to think those stories about haunted antiques were nothing but nonsense. Then I visited a local antiques fair, saw this strange clown puppet, and brought it home. Now I can't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I blink, I feel like it moves. And the nights have become something I dread, because the sound of wood against wood echoes in my hallway, even though I live alone. That puppet is never where I left it when the sun comes up. My name is Victor. I'm a middle-aged guy who works in a small furniture shop. I've always collected old marionettes because I appreciate the craftsmanship. Some people might find them creepy, but I've never had a problem. I keep them on shelves in my home office. They're all carved out of wood, with joints connected by string or thin metal rods. Most of them have cheerful expressions, or neutral faces. They just sit there day after day and I dust them off once a week. That was my routine for years. Nothing weird ever happened. Things changed the day I visited an antiques fair downtown. I walked past booths full of porcelain dolls, old coins, vinyl records, and random curios. I felt comfortable there, surrounded by items from the past. Usually I'd take my time, ask a few questions, look for anything that stood out. This time, I spotted a small table tucked in the corner with a sign that said "Estate Finds." The table had different trinkets, but my eyes locked on a wooden marionette right away. It was a clown with faded red and white face paint. It wore a small pointed hat. The paint made the clown look sad, like the corners of its mouth were curved downward. The eyes were dark, with tiny black dots that seemed to stare right through you. I picked it up to get a closer look. The wood was smooth on the arms, but rough around the joints. The paint around the mouth was chipped. One of the strings was frayed, but nothing that I couldn't fix. It felt heavier than I expected, like the wood was denser than normal. I asked the vendor where he got it. He shrugged and said it came from some old attic. I felt drawn to it. I don't know if I found its sad face interesting or if I just wanted another clown marionette for my collection. Either way, I handed over some cash and took it home. That evening, I set it on a shelf in my office with the others. I looked at it for a moment. The face was so detailed that I could see tiny brush strokes in the paint, almost like someone had tried to capture a realistic expression of sorrow. I felt a slight chill, but I shrugged it off. I turned off the light in my office and went to watch TV in the living room. The first night, I didn't sleep well. I had a dream about walking down a narrow hallway. At the end of it, the clown marionette stood in a spotlight, its mouth open. It didn't speak, but I heard a faint squeak, like wood scraping wood. I jolted awake. My heart was pounding and I was sweating. I checked the time, 3:12 a.m. My bedroom door was open and I realized I could hear something soft. It sounded like the gentle creak of floorboards. At first I thought maybe the house was settling or maybe there was a breeze outside. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I got out of bed, turned on the hallway light, and found nothing. No windows were open. No intruders. I told myself I was imagining things. The next morning, I walked into my office and did a double take. The new clown marionette wasn't on the shelf where I had placed it. It was lying on its back on the desk, facing the ceiling. I stood there trying to remember if maybe I had moved it the night before, but I was sure I'd put it on the shelf. My other marionettes were all in their usual spots, looking forward. This one was a couple feet away from where I'd left it. I picked it up and checked its joints. Everything seemed normal. I set it back on the shelf, this time making sure I placed it right in the middle. That day I tried to ignore the incident. I went to work, sold a couple pieces of furniture, chatted with a coworker about football, but I kept thinking about that marionette. I wondered if I was sleepwalking or if there was some rational explanation. By the time I came home, I felt a vague anxiety. I went straight to my office and everything looked fine. The clown sat where I left it. I made dinner, watched some news, and went to bed around 11. That night, I had another dream. In it, I was sitting at my desk trying to repair a broken marionette string. Then I felt something tap my shoulder. I turned around and saw the clown marionette standing on its own. Its mouth slowly opened and closed like it was trying to speak. The movement was jerky. I heard a faint scraping noise that reminded me of wood rubbing against wood. I woke up with my heart pounding, and it took me a minute to calm down. I got a glass of water from the kitchen. The hallway was dark, and I realized how quiet the house was. I tried to shake off the dream. On the way back to my bedroom, I heard a creaking noise again. It came from the direction of my office. I stopped, listened, and felt a surge of adrenaline. It was that same rhythm like light steps on a wooden floor. I don't know why, but I felt terrified. My mouth went dry. My fingers tightened around the glass. I waited, breathing fast, but after a few seconds, the noise stopped. I thought about opening the office door to check, but fear held me back. I've never been the type to scare easily, but something about this puppet was triggering an uneasy feeling in my gut. I went back to bed, though I barely slept. The next morning, I forced myself to walk into the office. Sure enough, the clown marionette wasn't on the shelf. It was sitting on my chair this time, leaning against the backrest. Its arms were in a slightly raised position, like it was reaching out. My stomach tightened and I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I approached it slowly, as if it might move at any moment. I touched it. The wood was cool. The joints were stiff. I felt a sudden urge to toss it in the trash, but that didn't make sense to me. I didn't want to destroy a piece of my collection, and logically I still believed there had to be a rational explanation. I moved it back to the shelf and went about my day. I tried to keep busy doing chores. I vacuumed the living room. I cleaned the kitchen counters. I took out the trash. But every time I passed by the office door, I glanced in, half expecting to see the clown somewhere else. By late afternoon, I was on edge. I sat down with my laptop to answer some emails, but I couldn't focus. I decided to examine the marionette more thoroughly. I turned on a bright desk lamp, grabbed a magnifying glass, and checked every inch of the carving. The face was so detailed that it almost felt like a human face painted onto wood. The eyes had tiny cracks in the paint, which made them look tired or old. The mouth was hinged, allowing it to open about half an inch. When I moved the mouth, it made a soft clicking sound. I pulled the strings to see if anything was rigged or if there was some mechanical trick. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except that one of the strings felt looser than before. I also noticed a small chip in the back of the head. Otherwise, it looked like a standard marionette, just more realistic than most. That night, I made a point of closing my office door before I went to bed. I turned the lock. I heard the bolt click in place, so I felt more at ease. Maybe the door was the answer. Even if I was sleepwalking, I couldn't get in there without unlocking it. I fell asleep around midnight. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of creaking wood again. This time it was followed by a soft clacking noise, like something tapping against the wall. My heart started pounding. I got up, grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, and stepped into the hallway. The office door was still closed. The lock was in place. I listened. The sound was coming from the living room. I moved slowly, every step making my pulse pound in my ears. The living room light was off, but some moonlight came through the windows. I swept the flashlight around. I didn't see anything unusual. I kept going, checking corners, behind the couch, near the bookshelf. Nothing. But then I saw the door to the office was slightly open. That made no sense. I had locked it. I aimed the flashlight inside the office. The clown marionette was gone from the shelf. I felt my stomach drop. My hand shook. I stepped backward into the hallway, wondering if I should leave the house. I couldn't understand how that door had opened. The lock was intact, but the door was ajar by a few inches. I kept listening for movement. My breath was shallow. I could feel sweat on the back of my neck. Then I heard a light thump in my bedroom. My pulse soared. I wanted to run, but something compelled me to see for myself. I turned around, walked toward my bedroom, and flicked on the light. The bed was unmade, but nothing looked out of place at first. I checked under the bed behind the door. The closet was closed. I held my breath and opened it. Inside, I saw the clown marionette sitting upright on a stack of old blankets. Its mouth was open, and one hand was raised as if reaching out. I froze. My vision narrowed and my heart hammered. The flashlight wavered in my grip. I stood there, not sure what to do. The puppet looked so still, yet so lifelike. I could almost swear the corners of its mouth twitched. I reached out, grabbed it by the torso, and yanked it out of the closet. I carried it to the living room. I could hardly breathe. I didn't want to destroy it, but I couldn't keep it in my house anymore. I decided I would lock it in a trunk in the garage until I figured out what to do. I walked to the garage door, turned on the overhead light, and found an old footlocker. I opened it up. It was mostly empty. I threw the puppet inside, shut the lid, and latched it. I sat on a wooden stool for a moment, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking, and my face felt hot. I thought about driving to a motel for the night, but that seemed ridiculous. I told myself it was just an antique. It couldn't possibly move on its own. Something strange was happening, but it might just be my mind playing tricks. I went back to bed, leaving the footlocker locked. I slept off and on, waking up every hour or so to check if anything was happening. The house stayed quiet. By morning, I felt a bit more rested, but still on edge. I opened the garage door. The footlocker was where I left it. I knelt down, flipped the latch, and hesitated. I pushed the lid open. The marionette was lying there in the same position I'd left it. I felt relief, but also dread. I didn't trust it anymore. I decided to keep it locked up until I could take it somewhere else. Over the next few days, nothing else happened during the nights. I slept better, though I'd sometimes hear faint creaking noises. I tried to ignore them. I left the marionette in the trunk, locked away. I kept my distance from the garage. But it bothered me that I had this thing in my possession. I considered tossing it in the dumpster or maybe burying it, yet I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me thought I could sell it, but that felt irresponsible. I didn't want to unload this problem on someone else. Each night I double-checked the garage door, making sure it was locked. I'd peek in once in a while to confirm the footlocker remained latched. It always was. But a week later, around 1 a.m, I heard a loud crash from the garage. I shot up in bed, heart racing. I grabbed my flashlight again and went to check. The garage light was off, but I switched it on and saw the footlocker had fallen off a small table and was lying on its side. The latch was undone, and the lid was wide open. The marionette was gone. My hands turned ice cold. My forehead broke out in sweat. I scanned the garage. No sign of it. I stepped outside, shining the flashlight around. The night air felt cold on my skin. Everything was still. I checked the yard, the driveway, even behind some trash cans. There was no trace of that puppet. I didn't know how it could have disappeared. The latch wasn't damaged and the lock wasn't broken, yet it was definitely open. I went back inside, every muscle tense. I left all the lights on. I checked each room one by one, bracing myself to find that painted face behind a door or around a corner. I didn't see anything. I felt this creeping sensation that I was being watched. My heart pounded in my ears. Finally, I ended up in my bedroom, trying not to panic. I waited for something to happen. Minutes ticked by. Then an hour. Nothing. The puppet never showed up. I didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, I searched every part of the house, the garage, and the yard again. It was gone. I couldn't explain it. I felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. I called in sick to work because I was exhausted. I stayed home all day, expecting that puppet to appear. But it didn't. My night stayed restless, but I never heard the same creaking or tapping again. The clown puppet that caused me so many nightmares simply vanished. I still live in the same house. I still collect marionettes, though I've been more cautious with my purchases. Sometimes I'll be dusting a shelf or walking down the hall at night, and I'll feel a rush of fear, wondering if I'll see that sad clown face staring at me from around a corner. I never do. but I can't shake the memory of those footsteps in the dark and the feeling of that mouth moving when I wasn't looking. I told a few friends about it, but they think I'm exaggerating or that I had some sort of stress-induced hallucination. All I know is that I didn't imagine the scratches on my hallway floor or the way that door lock kept opening without a key. I haven't gone back to that antiques fair. My collection remains on the shelves, and sometimes I find myself staring at them late at night, expecting one of them to move. But they never do. It was only that clown. It's out there somewhere, and I don't know if someone else might find it. Sometimes I wonder if it's better that it disappeared. I can't explain what happened, but I don't want to go through it again. And if anyone ever tells me they found a sad-faced wooden clown puppet, I'll tell them to leave it where it is. I've had enough restless nights to last a lifetime. I never expected to feel uneasy the moment I stepped inside a silent building. But that night I felt it right away. The old mountain lodge looked quiet from the outside, and I assumed I would walk around, take my notes, and leave. I was wrong. I parked my car on a gravel patch near a broken fence. There was a weak light from the moon, and I saw the outline of the lodge up on a slope. The front porch had missing boards. The air felt sharp against my face. My instructions were simple: evaluate the property and file a report. I had a clipboard in my bag along with a flashlight and a few extra batteries. I didn't plan on staying for more than an hour. I switched on the flashlight and headed toward the door. The hinges squeaked when I pushed it open. I stepped into the lobby, which had a high ceiling with a rustic chandelier. The place smelled like dust and damp wood. My footsteps echoed on the uneven floor. I looked around and saw the empty reception desk, an old sofa with torn cushions and a few framed photos on the walls. I shone the flashlight on a painting of a mountain range. The colors were faded, but I recognized the local peaks. Then I heard something above me. It sounded like a quick shuffle across a floorboard. I stopped. My heart thumped. I tried to brush it off as some loose part of the structure. I spoke to myself, saying it was just the building settling. But then I heard a steady pace of steps on the second floor. It wasn't one step or two. It sounded like someone walking. I gripped my flashlight tighter, told myself to stay calm, and decided to investigate. I moved toward the staircase at the far side of the lobby, shining the beam of light ahead. The banister felt rough under my hand. Each step creaked. My breath caught in my chest when I reached the top of the stairs. It was dark, and the narrow corridor stretched in both directions. I heard nothing. The footsteps had stopped. The corridor floor was dusty, and I saw footprints near a series of closed doors, but they looked old. I walked slowly, shining the flashlight on each door. I reached the end of the corridor. Nothing stirred. Then I heard a thump behind me. It wasn't loud, but it made me flinch. I spun around and aimed the flashlight at the nearest wall. The thump sounded like something striking wood. I waited, muscles tense, listening. Then the lights flickered. That made me jump. I looked up, stunned. The overhead bulbs buzzed and flickered, even though the lodge had no active power supply, at least according to my paperwork. The flickering lasted only a couple of seconds, but it was enough to make my heart pound. The hallway went dark again. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should keep going or head back to the lobby. I reminded myself that I had a job to do. My client wanted a detailed assessment, and I needed to inspect each room, check the structure, and document any damage. I tried to steady my breathing and chose one of the doors on my right. It led to a small bedroom with a single bed frame and a dusty dresser. I waved the flashlight around. I saw nothing unusual. I wrote a quick note in my small notebook, ignoring the slight tremor in my hand. I stepped back into the corridor. The air felt heavier. I decided to check the kitchen next because I needed to look at the condition of the appliances. Maybe I would find an explanation for the flickering lights. I walked back down the stairs, through the lobby, and followed a sign that pointed toward the dining area and kitchen. The dining room was large, with several tables and a row of tall windows that revealed dark silhouettes of pine trees outside. I saw a stack of wooden chairs piled against the wall. They were covered in dust. I pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen. My flashlight revealed a row of stainless steel counters, old ovens, and a walk-in pantry at the far end. The smell of stale grease lingered. I started taking notes about the condition of the counters and checked the stoves. Then, from behind me, I heard a scraping sound. It was like metal sliding across metal. I turned around and saw a pot moving on the countertop. It was a slow, deliberate slide. My heart hammered. I felt my chest tighten. My flashlight shook in my grip. The pot stopped. I stared at it, breathing fast. There was no wind, no draft. I didn't see any cords or anything that could have pulled it. I took one step forward, then froze when I heard the same sound on another counter. A smaller saucepan shifted a few inches. I wanted to leave. My palms were sweaty and my stomach twisted. But I stayed. I walked toward the pots and tried to see if there was anything under them. The surfaces were empty. I touched one pot. It was cold. I stood there, my flashlight beam bobbing, feeling my heart drumming in my ears. Then I heard a loud clang. It came from the sink area, out of view behind a partition. I rushed over and found a ladle on the floor. I felt like the walls were pressing in on me. I stepped back, trying to stay calm. There was no sign of another person. The exit door in the corner was closed. I forced myself to keep going. I had to see if there was some hidden entrance or a reason for the movement of these items. I checked the pantry. Empty. The shelves were dusty. I saw no footprints except my own. I decided to finish my inspection later. I wanted to move out of the kitchen before anything else happened. I walked back through the dining room, feeling a chill on the back of my neck. The sense of being watched was strong. I aimed the flashlight around the tables but saw only empty chairs and dusty surfaces. Then I heard music. It was distant, tinny, and it sounded like an old song. The melody was slow, maybe from a piano or a music box. It was faint, but it seemed to come from somewhere on the second floor. The hair on my arm stood up. I couldn't believe I was hearing music in a place with no power. I felt torn between leaving immediately and seeing this through. I swallowed hard, told myself I was a professional, and walked back to the staircase. The corridor above looked the same. No lights flickered now. The music drifted around, growing a bit louder as I moved farther down. I tried each door, but they were locked. At the end of the corridor, I spotted a door that was slightly open. The music seemed stronger near it. I pushed the door open and shone my flashlight inside. It was a larger suite with a small sitting area. There was an old radio on a side table. Its dial was broken, the antenna bent, and the cord was unplugged, but the music was coming from that radio. I approached it, heart pounding. The volume was low, but I recognized an old tune that I'd heard in some black and white movie. I reached out, gripped the radio, and tried to turn the knobs. They were stiff. The music hissed and then stopped. Silence. I let out a shaky breath. The radio was still unplugged. I stared at it, my hand trembling. I left it there and backed away. My temples were throbbing. I needed to wrap this up. I decided to check the structural integrity of the main corridors, then get out. I walked back into the hall. That's when a door slammed. It was 2 doors down from me across the corridor. The sound reverberated through the hallway. I tightened my jaw and approached. The door was locked. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I knocked once. No response. I considered walking away. Then I heard a scraping sound inside, like a chair moving. I yelled, "Hello? Is someone in there?" No answer. I pressed my ear to the wood. I only heard the hum of silence. Then something bumped against the door. I jerked back, almost dropping my flashlight. My mind raced. I began checking the other doors nearby, thinking maybe there was an adjoining room. I found the next door slightly ajar. I stepped inside and saw a modest bedroom with a closet and a small window. The closet door was open. Inside, I noticed a hole in the wall that looked like it led into the adjacent room. It wasn't big enough for me to crawl through, but it was there. The edges of the opening were rough, as if someone had broken through the plaster. I peered inside with the flashlight, but I couldn't see much. The other side was dark. A cold draft brushed my face. I backed away and let out a tense exhale. I returned to the corridor and stood in front of the locked door again. I wondered if there was anyone behind it, or if it was some trick of the building's shifting framework. Then I remembered the footsteps I had heard earlier. My pulse quickened. I decided I had enough evidence that something was wrong here. I wanted to leave, finalize my notes, and send a report that the property was in poor condition. I headed back toward the stairs. As I passed the other rooms, the lights flickered again, just for a moment. I gripped the banister and walked down as fast as I could without stumbling. When I reached the lobby, the entire space felt even colder than before. I heard a strange creaking sound near the old sofa. I shone my flashlight there. The sofa shook once, then went still. My mouth went dry. I didn't go any closer. I headed for the exit. My pace was quick, and my back felt stiff from tension. I reached the front door and pushed it open. The night air hit me, and I let out a long breath. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, noticing that my hands were shaking. The lodge loomed behind me, dark and silent again. I walked down the steps, shining the flashlight on the path. Gravel crunched under my shoes. My car was still there, alone under the moonlight. I opened the driver's door and tossed my clipboard onto the passenger seat. I slumped behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine coughed a bit before starting. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure at the entrance, but there was no one there. My heart was still racing. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the main road. As I navigated the winding road downhill, I kept replaying every noise and movement in my head. The flickering lights made no sense. The radio playing by itself felt impossible. The kitchen pots moving scared me the most. I couldn't explain that. My body was tense and my shirt clung to my back from sweat. I reached the hotel where I was staying for the night. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat there for a minute, breathing hard. I looked over my notes. They were incomplete. I needed more details about the structure, the wiring, and the plumbing. But after what I experienced, I doubted I could go back alone. My client wanted a full report, but I had enough to indicate that this place was more than neglected. Something was off. I locked the car and headed inside my hotel. I nodded at the night clerk without a word, took the elevator to my floor, and entered my room. I shut the door and leaned against it, letting out a shaky exhale. I set my bag on the small table, took off my jacket, and fell onto the bed. My mind kept returning to that moment in the kitchen, the sliding pans, the sudden clang. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to block out the memory, but the images wouldn't fade. I turned on the bedside lamp. The soft glow calmed me a little. I took out my phone and thought about calling a friend or coworker, but it was late. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. Instead, I typed a short message to my boss. Site visit done. Strange issues. Will explain in person. I left it at that. I plugged my phone into charge and stared at the ceiling. I stayed awake for a while, thinking about what I should do next. Maybe I should hire an electrician to check the wiring, bring someone else along for the final inspection. Maybe I should let the client know the lodge was unsafe. But that didn't explain the movement of objects or the radio playing. I didn't have logical answers. I only knew I felt threatened in that place. Every moment felt like it was pushing me out. I remembered the footsteps upstairs, the door slamming, the voice I thought I heard. I tried to recall if I actually heard a voice or if my own pulse in my ears tricked me. By the time I drifted to sleep, it was almost dawn. My nerves were still tight, but exhaustion took over. When I woke up, I felt sore, like I had been clenching my muscles all night. I got dressed and went to the small dining area in the hotel for a quick coffee. My hands were steadier now, but my mind was still full of unanswered questions. I took a long sip and tried to think of a plan. I decided I wouldn't return alone. I would gather more information about the lodge from old records. I would check if there was a caretaker or some previous owner who might have a key to those locked rooms. I would list the structural issues for my client. but I would also mention the odd flickering lights and the strange sounds. I felt uneasy telling them about moving pots or a radio playing by itself. That sounded absurd, but I had to share something that explained why I couldn't complete a normal inspection. The place didn't feel vacant. It felt guarded. I finished my coffee and left the cup on the table. I felt an urge to put distance between me and that property, but I knew I had a job to do, and I couldn't just pretend I found normal wear and tear. The lodge gave me the impression it didn't want new owners. It felt like it didn't want anyone inside. I didn't believe in anything supernatural, but my body had reacted like I was in danger. I stepped outside the hotel and stood in the sunlight. I decided I would submit a preliminary report that afternoon and request backup for a second visit. My chest still felt tight when I remembered the footsteps on the second floor and the door that slammed. I kept thinking about how the energy was cut off. None of the lamps should have worked, and yet I saw them flicker. I got into my car and started the engine. It was a new day, but my memory of the lodge was fresh. I looked at the passenger seat, where my clipboard and notes were stacked. I would have to read them again later. For now, I just drove away, hoping the next steps would be clearer. But the thought of returning alone made my stomach clench. I knew I had to go back eventually, but I had a strong feeling that lodge would make me regret it. I remember the moment I stepped off the local bus and smelled the stale air around the edge of town. The driver barely spoke to me when I asked if there were any cheap places to sleep. He pointed down a narrow road with broken pavement and told me there might be a few rooms for rent in that direction. The sky was a dark gray. The sun had just disappeared behind some low hills. I felt my shoulders tense. I was only planning to stay 2 nights before heading back to a more central area. I clutched my backpack, checked my pockets to make sure I still had my wallet, and started walking. The buildings near the bus stop were mostly small shops with rusted metal shutters. A couple of them sold groceries or random household items. Their neon signs buzzed with weak light. The sidewalks were uneven, with cracks and missing tiles that forced me to step carefully. I saw a few people slumped against walls, some staring at me with suspicion. I sensed an unfriendly vibe. Nobody spoke to me, and I didn't try to strike up a conversation. The only thing on my mind was finding a cheap room. After about 10 minutes, I came across a low, rectangular building with peeling paint on the walls. A wooden sign out front advertised rooms for rent by the day. It didn't have a flashy entrance or any kind of reception desk. I pushed open a small gate in front of the building and stepped into a tiny courtyard filled with dead leaves and a couple of plastic chairs. A tall, thin man wearing a dirty shirt and pants greeted me. He didn't smile. He looked at me from head to toe and nodded once. I told him I needed a room for 2 nights. He scratched his head, then led me to a cramped space at the far end of a narrow hallway. The hallway lights flickered. I saw spider webs in the corners. I noticed the faint smell of mildew. He opened the door to a room that had a single bed with an old mattress and a small wooden table against one wall. A chair sat under the table. There was a tiny bathroom in the corner with a flickering bulb above the mirror. The man said the price. I handed him the cash. He gave me a key attached to a plastic keychain shaped like a local beer logo. Then he left without any small talk. I set my backpack on the chair and looked around. The bed squeaked when I pressed my hand on it. The walls were a dull beige color, chipped in places. The single window faced a back alley. The glass looked scratched and dirty, and there was a thin curtain with a few stains on it. I tried the light switch on the wall. It worked, but the overhead light buzzed. I noticed a faint flicker now and then. I exhaled, took off my jacket, and locked the door. I decided to walk around the neighborhood to get a sense of the place before it got too late. I stepped outside and noticed that the man who rented me the room was nowhere in sight. The courtyard was empty except for the plastic chairs. I opened the small gate at the front and felt a rush of cold night air as I stepped onto the street. There was a single street light up ahead, and it cast a weak circle of light on the cracked pavement. Beyond that circle, the road looked darker with only occasional lights in the windows of run-down houses or small businesses. I saw a few figures moving along the sidewalk. They walked slowly and kept their heads low, as if they were afraid to draw attention to themselves. Their clothes looked ragged. Their steps were uneven. One man had a slight limp. Another person had a hood pulled tight around their face. I heard the faint sound of a radio from somewhere inside one of the homes. A dog barked in the distance. The air smelled like garbage and something else I couldn't place, maybe burnt plastic. My stomach felt uneasy. I told myself it was just a rough part of town. I'd seen similar areas before in other places, but I couldn't shake the discomfort crawling up my back. I walked to a small store that had a flickering fluorescent light above its entrance. Inside, I found shelves half-stocked with canned food, bottled water, and snacks. I grabbed some water and a couple of packaged sandwiches. The woman behind the counter barely looked at me. Her eyes darted to the door every time she heard a noise outside. I asked if it was safe to walk around at night. She shrugged and said, "Don't stay out too late." Her voice was flat. She didn't elaborate. I paid and walked back toward my room. On the way, I noticed the silhouettes of a few people standing under a broken streetlight. Their shadows stretched oddly across the pavement. I stopped for a moment and tried to figure out why they looked so long. The angle of the light was strange, but it felt more intense than that. Their shadows seemed to ripple, almost as if they were extending further than they should. I blinked and looked again. One of the figures turned slightly, and I saw eyes reflecting the dim light. They were higher than normal eye level, as if the person was standing on something or was unusually tall. I felt my palms sweat. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. Back in my room, I locked the door carefully. I pushed the chair against it for extra security. Then I checked the window. The latch seemed flimsy, so I stuck a piece of folded cardboard where the window slid shut. The overhead light in the room was too bright, and it flickered in a distracting way, so I turned it off and used the small lamp near the bed instead. I ate the sandwiches without much appetite and kept my eyes on the window. I listened. I heard muffled music from a distant radio. I heard the occasional bark of a dog. Then sometime around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door. They didn't linger. They moved on after a moment. I couldn't tell who it was. My heart pounded. I stayed quiet. The next day, I woke up early. I splashed some water on my face in the tiny bathroom and decided I'd explore a bit more during daylight, then try to catch a bus out of there the following morning. I still had one more night to go. I left the building around 8 in the morning and saw the tall, thin man again. He was sweeping the courtyard. His eyes looked tired. I nodded to him, and he nodded back. I didn't feel like asking him any questions. I was sure I wouldn't get many answers. Once on the street, things looked a bit less threatening in the daylight. There were more people around, some shops open, a few motorbikes passing by. I walked to a small eatery and had a simple meal of rice and some kind of local stew. It was salty but filling. I paid the owner and left without much conversation. As the day wore on, I noticed that the further I went from my rental room, the more normal the town appeared. I saw small vendors selling fruit, people chatting on corners, and a couple of street dogs trotting around. But the area near my lodging still felt tense. Near midday, I passed by a narrow alley and heard a low, throaty sound. It could have been a person clearing their throat or maybe an animal. I peeked down the alley and saw a figure moving in the shadows. It wore dark clothes, and I could only see the outline of a hunched body. The figure turned its head toward me, and for a split second, I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the daylight in a weird way. It reminded me of a cat's eyes in the dark, but this was broad daylight. I stumbled back, felt my heart rate jump, and walked away fast. The figure stayed where it was. The rest of the afternoon, I tried to stay in more populated areas. I grabbed a coffee at a small cafe. The coffee was strong and bitter. A few locals stared at me, probably wondering what I was doing in that part of town. I couldn't relax. I kept looking over my shoulder. At one point, I visited a local market and browsed through stacks of old clothes just to pass the time. I asked a vendor about buses out of town. He said there'd be one leaving early the next morning from the main road about 15 minutes away. I decided I'd get there well before sunrise to avoid missing it. I returned to my room before dusk, feeling uneasy about being outside at night. I locked the door again and wedged the chair under the doorknob. I drew the curtain and sat on the bed, trying to read an old magazine I found in the hallway. The words didn't hold my attention. My mind kept drifting to the strange eyes I saw in the alley. I felt a dull ache in my stomach. My muscles were tense, and my skin felt clammy. Around 9 that evening, I turned off the lamp to save the little bit of comfort it provided, hoping the darkness would keep me from drawing attention from outside. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling. The faint smell of mildew was stronger at night, maybe because the air was cooler. I pulled the blanket over me and closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. My body remained alert. My ears picked up every little noise in the hallway or outside in the street. The hours dragged on. Close to midnight, I heard soft scratching at the metal gate in front of the building. At first, I thought it was a stray dog. Then I heard a low hiss, like air escaping from something. My heart thumped. I got up, moved quietly to the window, and pulled the edge of the curtain aside by a tiny fraction. I saw a vague shape near the gate. It stood on 2 legs, but its back was angled in an unnatural way, like it was leaning forward. I couldn't see its face clearly. The streetlight was too dim. I heard a click or snap, and then the gate rattled. I held my breath. My hand shook against the curtain. The shape crouched, and I got a glimpse of 2 shining eyes. They reflected the weak light from the street almost like an animal's eyes in the dark. My stomach churned. I felt sweat on my forehead. The shape then stood still for a moment, as if it was looking right at me. My chest felt tight. I wanted to move away from the window, but I couldn't make myself do it. My muscles locked up. Then I heard a soft grunt. The figure shifted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a long, thin limb that didn't look right under those clothes. The arms seemed longer than normal. The figure gripped the gate, tugged it a couple of times, then let go. I heard a low growl, followed by the sound of footsteps moving away down the street. I let out a slow breath and felt my knees weakening. I backed away from the window and sat on the bed. I stayed awake, shivering under the blanket, until I saw the first light of dawn through the dirty window. My plan was to leave as soon as it was bright enough outside. I gathered my stuff, tossed some water on my face, and paced around the tiny room. Around 6 in the morning, I finally stepped outside. The courtyard was empty. I walked through the small gate, glancing at the spot where I saw that shape the night before. The metal latch was bent as if someone had tried to force it open. Outside on the street, things were quiet. A few people were setting up stalls for morning business. I gripped my backpack straps and walked quickly toward the main road. My legs felt stiff. My thoughts raced. I didn't want to talk to anyone about what I saw. I just wanted to get out of that area. The morning light helped my nerves a bit, but not enough to calm my racing pulse. After about 15 minutes, I saw the main road. A single bus was parked there, waiting to take passengers to a larger city. I hurried toward it, bought a ticket from a tired-looking man holding a clipboard, and climbed on board. I picked a seat near the window and tried to steady my breathing. A few other passengers sat scattered around the bus. They looked like people who had just finished a long night shift or were going to work in the next town. I waited for the bus to start moving, afraid that something would come stalking around the corner at any moment. Eventually, the driver boarded, turned on the engine, and we pulled away from that place. I stared out the window, watching the worn streets and grimy buildings pass by. My shoulders slowly relaxed. My forehead still felt damp. I realized I was squeezing my hands into fists, so I forced myself to loosen them. As we left that area behind, the buildings became a bit newer, and I saw more signs of normal activity. I spent the entire ride replaying the events in my head, especially the moment I looked out the window and saw those eyes. I can still picture how they glinted in the dark. I can still hear that hiss and the sound of the gate rattling. My body reacts, just remembering it. Even now, I don't know what that thing was. Part of me wants to say it was just a desperate person with unusual features. Another part of me can't accept that explanation. Whatever I saw felt wrong, like it was something that shouldn't exist in a normal world. I never went back to that area. I never told the authorities. I doubt they would have believed me. The only reason I'm mentioning it now is because it still makes my skin crawl to think that in some neighborhoods, we might come across things that watch us with hungry eyes. I'm just glad I got out of there without a direct confrontation. That one night was enough for me to realize that the darkness in some places isn't always about common crime or random danger. Sometimes there's something else moving around. I felt it in every nerve of my body, and I don't plan to forget it. I'll never forget the moment I first saw that guy on the side of the road. It was close to 1 a.m, and the air felt icy against my face every time I rolled down the window. I was heading down a back road that almost nobody uses anymore. I'd taken a wrong turn at some point and decided to cut through this old highway instead of turning around. I'm a truck driver, so deserted roads don't usually bother me. But something about that night got under my skin. I'd been driving for hours and my neck was stiff. My hands felt dry from gripping the wheel. Every time my headlights swept across the pavement, I saw cracks, potholes, and loose gravel. The paint on the lane markings was so faded I had to squint to stay in the right spot. The radio was on low, but it was nothing but static and random bursts of some station I couldn't quite tune in. Every few minutes, I glanced at the passenger seat to check my thermos of coffee, but it was already empty. The first time I spotted him, I almost missed it. He was standing on the shoulder near an old, beat-up car. It looked like something from the 1950s. The car was dark, maybe dark green or black, hard to tell in the dim light. The man was leaning against the driver's side door. He wore an old-fashioned suit, the kind you might see in ancient photographs, and he had a hat that looked like a fedora or a trilby. I couldn't see his face clearly until I slowed down. I wanted to see if he needed help, because not many people pass through there. But as I pulled closer, I realized he was staring straight at me. Not moving, not blinking, just staring. I rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, you need a hand?" I felt the cold air rush in. It hit my face and made my eyes water. He didn't respond. He just kept staring. I remember feeling uneasy, but I figured maybe he was in shock or something, so I tried again. I leaned over the passenger seat and reached across to push the door open a bit, just in case. "You okay out there?" I asked. No reaction. I could see he was tall, maybe a bit under 6 feet, and his clothes seemed too neat for someone broken down on a deserted road. My gut told me something was off. I kept the engine idling. I was thinking about whether I should step out or not. The road was silent except for my engine. The wind rustled the bare trees around us, and somewhere way off in the distance, I heard a dog barking. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when I noticed the man hadn't blinked once. His eyes were wide open, locked on me. My truck's headlights lit up the front of his car and cast strange shadows across his face. I couldn't read his expression, but I could feel tension in the air. After maybe 30 seconds of this standoff, I decided to drive on. Something about him felt wrong, and I didn't want to push my luck. I pressed the gas, rolled up the window, and checked my mirrors as I continued. I saw him fade into the darkness. For a few minutes, I kept checking the rearview mirror. He stayed in the same spot, didn't wave, didn't do anything. Eventually, I stopped looking back. I just wanted to reach the main highway and be done with that detour. The next day, I told a coworker about what happened. We were parked at a truck stop, grabbing coffee before heading our separate ways. He joked that maybe I saw a ghost. I'm not the superstitious type, so I brushed it off. But that night I had a delivery in the same general area. I didn't want to, but the route was faster than taking the long way around, and I had a strict schedule to keep. So I ended up on that lonely highway again. It was around midnight when I reached the same stretch of road. The sky was overcast, and there was just a sliver of moonlight peeking through the clouds. The temperature felt even colder. The radio was still useless in that area, so I turned it off. My coffee thermos was warm this time, and I sipped it to stay awake. As I neared the spot where I'd seen the man, I felt my stomach tighten. My palms started sweating against the steering wheel, and I found myself gripping it so hard that my knuckles ached. Then I saw him again. Same car, same posture, same old-fashioned clothes. The only difference was the way he looked at me this time. As I approached, his head turned, following my movement. His gaze locked onto my headlights, then moved slowly until he was looking right at me through my windshield. My heart pounded. I eased off the gas a little, debating whether to stop. But I remembered how weird he had been the night before, so I decided against it. I lowered my speed enough to get a better look without coming to a complete stop. His eyes tracked my truck as I passed. I could see the reflection of my headlights in his pupils. He looked alive, but there was still no expression on his face. No sign of relief or concern, just that cold, steady stare. My hands trembled on the wheel. I heard my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. My breathing got shallow. For a second, I thought I saw his lips twitch like he was about to smile, but I couldn't be sure. This time, I didn't try to talk to him. I kept my windows up, locked my doors, and kept my foot on the gas. I could feel my pulse racing. My shoulders got tense, and my gut churned like I was about to get sick. After I passed him, I fought the urge to keep looking in my mirror, but I couldn't help it. I glanced up and saw him standing there, watching me until I was out of sight. I felt a chill run from the base of my spine all the way up to my scalp. It made my scalp tingle, and I had a sudden urge to press down on the accelerator. When I got off that highway, I stopped at a convenience store for a few minutes. I needed fresh air and maybe another cup of coffee. Inside, I just paced around near the snack aisles. My heart was still beating too fast, and my hands shook when I poured coffee into a cup. The clerk gave me a strange look, but didn't say anything. I didn't offer any explanation. I left, got back in the truck, and finished my route, but I kept thinking about that man. The following day, I dreaded going back. I considered taking a different path altogether, one that would add an extra hour to my drive. But the company's schedule was tight, and I had to do my job. Plus, part of me wanted to check if the man would be there again. It was like I couldn't rest until I knew more. I kept telling myself it was probably just some guy who liked to dress in retro clothes, maybe a collector who had an old car. But that didn't explain his behavior, and it didn't explain how I felt whenever I saw him. On the third night, I hit that same stretch of highway around the same time. The sky was clear and the moon was bright enough to light the road. I felt a knot in my stomach as I approached the spot. My hands were clammy, and my foot hovered over the brake pedal. I kept scanning both sides of the road, waiting to see that old car or that figure in the suit. But this time, there was nothing. The shoulder was empty. The only thing there was a faint set of tire marks in the gravel, like someone had been parked in that exact spot for a long time. They led onto the asphalt, then vanished about a foot from the road. I slowed down and leaned forward in my seat, trying to make sense of the tracks. They looked fresh. The edges were sharp, not smudged by wind or passing traffic. I pulled over, leaving my headlights on. My heart was pounding again, and I could feel a buzzing sensation in my legs. I got out of the truck and stepped onto the cold ground. The wind stung my cheeks and made my eyes tear up. I kept my ears open, listening for anything unusual. The silence felt heavier than before. I bent down and touched the gravel where the tire marks started. My fingers came away with a bit of dust. No footprints, though. No sign of the man, just those tracks. I looked around, aiming my flashlight toward the trees. They swayed a bit in the wind, but I saw nothing else. No rustling, no voices, no sign of the old car. I felt a wave of relief and disappointment at the same time. Part of me wanted to see him again just to confirm he was real. But another part was grateful he was gone because the tension in my chest was overwhelming. My heart was beating so loud I was sure someone standing next to me could hear it. I walked back to my truck and stood by the driver's door for a minute. My breath came out in white puffs, and I rubbed my arms through my jacket. I kept looking toward the tire marks, wondering if I was about to see headlights flicker on, but nothing happened. It was all still. My body felt shaky, and I realized how tense I was. I got back into the driver's seat and locked the doors. I sat there with the engine running, staring at those tracks in my mirrors. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me from somewhere. Eventually, I put the truck in gear and drove off. The rest of the road was quiet and empty. I kept glancing at the side mirrors and rearview mirror, half expecting that old car to come out of nowhere with its headlights off, tailing me. But I made it to the highway without seeing anything. My heart rate slowed down and my shoulders stopped aching as much. I told myself it was probably just some weird coincidence, but deep down I wasn't convinced. After delivering my load, I pulled into a rest area and tried to sleep. My mind replayed the events of the last 3 nights, especially the way he stared at me. I couldn't figure it out. Why stand there without moving? Why show up in the exact same place with the exact same car, wearing the same clothes? And then why vanish on the 3rd night, leaving only tire marks behind? In the morning, I drank coffee with a friend at the rest area. He asked how my run went. I kept my story brief, just said I saw something strange. I could tell he thought I was just tired. Maybe I was. But I could still remember every detail of that man's face. The way his eyes seemed to lock onto me like I was the only person left in the world. The way his clothes looked perfectly pressed even though he was in the middle of nowhere at night, supposedly with car trouble. I haven't been back to that highway since. I managed to arrange a different route with my supervisor, even if it means driving extra miles. The thought of passing that spot again sends a chill through me. I don't know if he was real, or if I had some bizarre hallucination, or if there's another explanation. All I know is what I saw: a man in vintage clothes standing next to an old car staring me down 2 nights in a row, then disappearing on the 3rd. The only proof left was the set of tire marks on the ground, like he'd been there for a while, and then drove off without a trace. Sometimes when I'm on another lonely stretch of road, I think about him. I remember those pale eyes and that stiff stance. My stomach tightens at the memory. I still feel that rush of cold air when I picture his face. I don't talk about it much because most people won't believe me, but I know what I saw. I know how I felt, and it still makes me uneasy to think about. Even now, my hands start sweating if I picture that dark shape on the side of the road. It's not about ghosts or anything like that. It's about something that felt wrong, something that made my instincts scream to keep driving. That's why I don't plan on going back there. If I ever see that man again, I'm not going to stop. I'm not even going to slow down. I'll keep moving and hope that next time, he stays gone for good. I've been on plenty of lonely roads in my life. I've seen weird stuff at rest stops. I've dealt with breakdowns and flat tires in the middle of nowhere. But I've never experienced anything like that man on that old highway. No matter how many miles I put behind me, I can't quite shake that feeling from my chest. Whenever I think of that stare, I feel my heart beat a little faster, and I tighten my grip on the wheel. Maybe he was just a guy who liked old cars. Maybe he was lost. But it didn't feel that way. I don't know what else to say. That's the story. I saw him 2 nights in a row. He vanished on the 3rd, leaving only those tire tracks behind. And I'm still trying to make sense of it. Let me be clear right from the start. I'm not crazy, and I'm not making this up. Something has been messing with my life ever since I moved into this building. I don't care if it sounds impossible. I know what I've seen and what I've heard. I can't explain it, but I can't ignore it either. I moved into this apartment about 2 months ago. It's on the 5th floor of a big residential tower that's close to my office. I chose this place for the location. My commute went from an hour in traffic to a 5-minute walk. The rent was higher than I wanted, but I convinced myself it was worth it. The place is small, just a living room, a compact kitchen, a bedroom, and a narrow bathroom. There's one big window in the living room that faces a row of tall buildings across the street. There's no balcony, and there's absolutely no ledge or sill outside. The exterior glass is smooth. If anyone were to stand out there, they'd have to be Spider-Man or something. Still, that's where this all began. The first night I spent here, I was so exhausted from unpacking that I almost fell asleep on the couch. Around midnight, I dragged myself to bed. The place was hot, and I remember opening the window just a crack for some air. I didn't hear anything strange that night, but I still felt uneasy. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar setting or the faint sounds of neighbors above and below. Sometimes, in a new place, Every creak or thump can feel like something sinister. I told myself to relax. After a few days, I settled into a routine. I'd wake up early, get ready for work, walk to the office, come back in the evening, cook something, watch some TV, and then go to bed. Everything seemed ordinary until I started hearing a strange scraping sound against my window at night. It was so quiet at first that I wasn't even sure if I was imagining it. Maybe it was the wind or tree branches brushing against the glass. Except there are no trees that tall outside, and the wind shouldn't make a distinct scraping noise. Still, I ignored it at first. I was tired from work and I just wanted to sleep. But over the next few nights, the noise got more persistent. It sounded like nails or fingertips dragging across glass. Slow, deliberate, a faint but recognizable scraping. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open, listening to it. My pulse would race, and I'd feel my heartbeat in my throat. Sometimes I'd sit up, walk to the living room, and switch on the lights. The noise would stop the moment I flipped that light switch. It was as if something was waiting for me to come closer. At some point, I decided to open the curtains and look. The first time I did that, my hands were shaking. I was half expecting to see an animal or maybe just an empty window. But there was nothing. No movement, no figure, no bird, no bat, no person. I stood there, heart pounding, scanning the darkness, waiting for some shape to appear. Nothing. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the scraping kept happening on and off, night after night. Work started getting tougher because I wasn't sleeping well. My boss made a few comments about me looking tired. I drank more coffee than usual. I tried to focus on projects, but sometimes I'd catch myself drifting off, thinking about the apartment and the noises. I considered the possibility of an external factor, maybe a loose piece of metal on the building's facade, or some weird airflow that caused a rattling. But I never saw any sign of damage or anything that could cause that distinct scratch. One night, I decided to stay up late in the living room with the lights off. I figured I'd catch whoever or whatever was making that sound. I turned off every light, unplugged everything that might give off a glow, and sat on the couch in the dark. The window was only a few feet away. I waited there for what felt like hours. At first, it was just the hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the occasional sound of a car passing on the street below. My eyes adjusted, and I could see the faint shapes of the buildings across from mine. Each had a few windows lit, but most were dark. Then I heard it. The scraping. It was soft at first, maybe 2 or 3 inches above the bottom of the window. It moved slowly, right to left. My chest felt tight, and my breathing got shallow. I tried to stay calm. My palms were sweating. I remember pressing them against my thighs to keep them steady. The scraping continued, moving up the window, a little at a time. It stopped right at the center of the glass. That was maybe 5 feet off the floor inside. I couldn't see anything outside, just darkness. But the sound was distinct. I got up from the couch, moving slowly, trying not to make any noise. My legs felt like they weighed a ton. As soon as I took a step toward the window, the scraping stopped. The silence was so sudden it made my ears ring. I was about to reach for the curtain when I heard a soft thump, like something had tapped the window. I froze. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I could feel the hair on my arm standing up. Then it was quiet again. I stood there for a minute, trying to will myself to pull the curtain aside. I eventually did, in one quick motion. Nothing. I pressed my forehead to the glass, looked down, looked up, looked side to side. No sign of anything. Just the empty street below and the dim lights in the building across. I let out a shaky breath and told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was some weird pressure change or something else. I went to bed feeling stupid for being so spooked, but things got worse. A couple of nights later, I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of nails scraping the window again. This time, it sounded more urgent, like it was trying to get attention. My heart started pounding right away. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I just walked toward the living room. The curtains were closed. The scraping continued. a steady drag. Then I heard a soft tapping, almost polite, like a person knocking. I pulled the curtain open a bit, just enough to look through. That's when I saw it. There was a shape clinging to the outside of the building. It had long arms stretched out along the glass. The arms were so skinny that they reminded me of wires. The figure's head was tilted forward, pressed right up against the window, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, just a dark outline, with a narrow body and limbs. It didn't move. It just stayed there, as if it was trying to see inside. My stomach turned and my throat felt like it was closing. I backed away, but I couldn't look away. My legs were trembling so hard that I had to steady myself against the couch. My mind was racing with 100 thoughts at once. Who was that? What was it doing there? How could anyone be hanging 5 stories up like that? The figure pressed its head closer, and I heard a slight creak of glass. My ears started ringing. I thought the glass would crack. For a moment I considered calling the police. Then a weird sense of shame washed over me. What would I say? That some impossible figure was sticking to the outside of my 5th floor window. They'd think I was drunk or paranoid. Still, I felt an urge to grab my phone to call somebody. Instead, I just stood there. My heart was pounding so loud I could feel it in my skull. Then in one smooth motion, the figure slid downward as if gravity finally decided to act on it. It was so fast, just a blur. In an instant, it disappeared beneath the bottom of the window. I rushed forward and pressed my face to the glass, looking down. I saw nothing but darkness. No shape, no movement. The streetlights didn't reveal anyone below. Everything was still. I stayed there, breathing hard, for at least 5 minutes. My fingers gripped the windowsill from inside. My knees felt weak. I remember thinking, I have to leave. I have to move out. But the practical side of me kept reminding me of the rent, the convenience, and my job. In the days that followed, I tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a window cleaner who got stuck or was playing a prank, but that made no sense at 2 a.m. And I've never seen any cleaning equipment on that side of the building. The staff in the lobby never mentioned a cleaning schedule at night. There's also no place to anchor a harness or platform near that window. Besides those arms, no harness could accommodate that kind of movement. I couldn't talk to my coworkers about it. They'd either laugh or think I was losing it. My best friend told me I was just having vivid nightmares. I tried to accept that idea, but the memory of seeing that thing was too real. I knew I wasn't asleep. I even pinched myself that night because I'd heard that's what you do when you suspect you're dreaming. I felt the pain, so I knew I was awake. The scratching sounds didn't stop. They came almost every night, sometimes at 1 a.m, sometimes at 3. I started wearing earplugs, but I'd still catch hints of that scraping sound through the foam. Occasionally I'd get up, yank the curtains open, and see nothing. Other times I wouldn't look because I was terrified I'd see it again, pressed against the glass. My mood got worse. I was on edge all the time. My body felt tense at work, and I jumped at small noises, like a coworker dropping a stapler. People kept asking if I was feeling okay. I lied and said I had insomnia. Last week I decided enough was enough. I called the building management and asked if they could check the exterior for any loose parts. They said they'd send someone up with a safety harness, but the earliest availability was 3 days away. I was anxious for them to inspect it, to find something that could explain all this. But a part of me knew they wouldn't find anything. 2 nights ago, I woke up to the loudest scraping yet. It sounded like someone was carving letters into the glass with a sharp knife. My chest tightened, and my hands started shaking before I even got out of bed. I walked slowly to the window, each step feeling heavier than the last. I paused at the edge of the curtain. My mouth felt dry, and my heart was thudding in my chest. I forced myself to pull the fabric aside. The figure was there again, arms splayed out along the glass, the head pressed forward. It was closer to the top of the window this time. I could see the faint outline of its body in the streetlight's glow. It didn't have a face that I could see, just a blank shape where the features should be. I could only watch, frozen. My thoughts were stuck in a loop. This is real. This is happening. The thing tapped the glass twice, a soft but deliberate motion. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. Then it slowly lifted its left arm. It looked more like an elongated hand than a normal arm. It gave the glass 3 light scratches. My stomach lurched. I took a step back. When I did, it pressed its head even harder, like it was trying to peer inside. I heard a faint squeak of the glass. At that moment, I became sure the window would shatter. My entire body felt hot and cold at the same time. My mind was blank, except for the instinct to back away. Then it happened again. The figure slid downward, vanishing from view. I stayed by the window, breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. After a while, I turned on every light in the apartment. It was 4 a.m, but I didn't care. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of water. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled half of it. I couldn't bring myself to look out that window again until sunrise. Management came to inspect the exterior the following day. I hung around my apartment pacing while they used some kind of safety rig to lower a guy on a harness outside my window. I heard them tapping and knocking on the walls. After about an hour, they told me they didn't see any cracks or loose panels. The surface was solid with no signs of damage. I didn't bring up the figure or the noises. I just nodded, thanked them, and they left. That same night, I heard the scraping again. I felt panic welling up, but I grabbed the curtain and yanked it open right away. Nothing. I was relieved, but my heart wouldn't slow down for a long time. I don't know what's going on. I haven't seen it again in the past day or so, but I still hear the sounds. Sometimes they're faint, sometimes they're more intense. I keep telling myself I'll move out the moment my lease is up, but that's several months away. Leaving early would mean paying a penalty I can't afford. I'm writing this because I want someone to believe me. I want someone to understand that this is real. I don't have any proof. I haven't been able to record it, and I sure as hell haven't been able to take a photo of that thing. But I know it's there. It's either a person with impossible abilities, or it's something that shouldn't exist at all. I just want it to leave me alone so I can sleep. I've tried ignoring it. I've tried confronting it by throwing the curtains open, and nothing stops it. I wish I had a resolution to share, but I don't. All I can do is wait and see if it goes away, or if it shows up again. Every night I brace myself for the sound of those long nails scraping the glass. Every night I wonder if I'll see that shape leaning against my window, arms stretched wide, head pressed against the pane. I can't stop thinking about those arms and the silent way it vanishes into the darkness. Whatever it is, it's out there, and it knows I'm in here. That's all I can say. I'm tired, I'm scared, and I'm stuck on the 5th floor of this building, waiting for the next scrape in the night. I felt a rush of cold air on my neck the moment I stepped into the library that night. It was past 11, and I had a stack of notes under my arm. I felt edgy from the start because the overhead lights in the main reading room were flickering. I had been in this place after hours many times, but something about that sudden chill made me pause at the entrance. I told myself it was just nerves from studying too long. My eyes felt tired, and my back ached from hunching over books all day. I was ready to gather my research materials and head back to my apartment. That was my plan until I heard that first laugh echo through the shelves. I was in the middle of the main aisle, right near the reference desk. I heard a muffled laugh drifting from somewhere in the older section of the library. It was a soft, quick burst of laughter, like someone trying not to be heard. The sound bounced off the walls, and I froze for a second, hoping I'd see someone stepping into view. I waited, but nobody came out. The overhead light hummed, and my heart started to pound. I shifted my notes under my arm and scanned the rows of shelves. The entire space looked empty. Most students had left hours ago. The building's security guard usually did a brief check close to midnight, but I hadn't heard him walk by. I whispered, "Is anyone there?" The only answer was a faint hiss from the ventilation system. I shrugged it off and forced myself to keep going. I had to finish scanning a few rare volumes on medieval architecture. Those books were stored in the far corner of the library, near a locked door that led to a smaller archive room. I took careful steps, making sure my shoes didn't squeak on the polished floor. Each step felt like an intrusion into some private space. I kept checking over my shoulder, expecting to see a classmate or a custodian or someone. But the corridor behind me stayed empty. My main goal was to get the books I needed and leave. I made my way deeper into the library. The older section had taller shelves and narrower aisles. The overhead lights were dimmer there, and the air felt stale. My footsteps sounded heavier on the old wooden floor. I reached the row where the medieval architecture texts were stored. I ran my finger along the spines, looking for the catalog numbers I had written on a scrap of paper in my pocket. While I was scanning the spines, I heard a light tapping sound to my left. It came from the other side of the shelf. I peered through a gap in the books, but I couldn't see anything. I waited, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement. Nothing moved. I put my hand against the shelf, feeling the sturdy wood. My stomach tightened. I was on edge. My neck felt tense, and my pulse beat faster. I tried to concentrate on the books. I found the first volume, then the second. I placed them on the floor next to me. I kept scanning the spines until I gathered all three. I tucked the volumes under my arm and walked back toward the main aisle. Before I reached the open area, I heard another laugh. This time it was louder, closer. My skin prickled. My scalp felt tight, and I could sense the hair on my arms standing up. I tried to swallow, but my mouth felt dry. I glanced in the direction of the sound, which seemed to come from a row of old periodicals. That section was separated by a row of tables. No one was sitting there. The chairs were all tucked in and the lamps were turned off. I took a few steps in that direction, even though part of me wanted to ignore it and leave. I said, "Hello?" Again, a little louder than before. My voice cracked. No answer came, only a low whisper, like wind passing through pages. I inched closer to the periodical shelves. I ran my free hand over the edge of the table to steady myself. The wood felt cold under my fingers. I stopped at the corner of the shelf and looked down the aisle. It was dark. The overhead light at the far end wasn't on, so the last 6 feet of space were covered in shadows. I considered turning on more lights, but something about that laughter made me hesitate. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I was breathing hard. My chest felt tight, and I could feel sweat forming on my temples. Then I heard a set of quick footsteps on the other side of the shelf, moving away from me. I leaned around the corner trying to catch whoever it was, but I saw only an empty aisle. The footsteps faded, and I wondered if my mind was playing tricks on me. I decided I'd had enough. I planned to leave. I gripped the books and headed toward the main entrance. The library was silent. Even the humming from the lights seemed to fade. My shoes clicked against the floor, echoing in a way that made me feel exposed. When I reached the main entrance, I glanced at the clock above the door. It showed 11:30, later than I expected. I flicked off the lights in the reading area, leaving only the dim hallway lights near the entrance. In that moment, I heard laughter again. It came from behind me, from the direction I had just left. It sounded closer than before. My muscles tensed, and my breath caught in my throat. I turned on my heel, half expecting to see someone standing right behind me. The reading room was dark, though. My eyes struggled to adjust. The corridor lights barely reached the center of the library, so I could only see a few scattered shapes of tables and shelves. Suddenly, I heard the sound of pages turning, like a book being flipped through at high speed. The noise echoed, and I couldn't pinpoint its location. I walked back in, flipping the light switches as I went. The fluorescent tubes blinked a few times before they lit up. The library looked the same as before, rows of shelves and old reading tables. Nothing looked out of place. I listened for more sounds. Everything was quiet again. I kept looking around. My heart was beating so fast that I could hear the thumping in my ears. My legs felt shaky and my hand holding the books was clammy. I decided to place the volumes on a nearby table because my arm was starting to hurt. Then I heard a faint rustling sound coming from a row to my right. I stepped in that direction, determined to find out if there was someone lurking. The library was big, but not so big that someone could hide for long without me seeing them. I walked slowly along the row, watching for any sign of movement. The shelves were crammed with old books, many of them worn out. The overhead light flickered again, making me blink. Then a large volume fell off a shelf about 10 feet away, landing with a thud on the floor. My stomach lurched. I rushed forward and picked it up. The cover looked faded and some of the pages were yellowed. I didn't see any reason for it to fall. It was wedged in pretty securely. I placed it back on the shelf and heard another book fall a few rows away, followed by a muffled laugh. I stood up, gripping the edge of the shelf. My entire body felt hot, but my skin broke out in goosebumps. I tried to take a deep breath. My throat felt tight, and I could taste adrenaline in my mouth. I decided I needed to get out of there, but some part of me wanted to see what was going on. I wanted an answer. I walked around the corner and saw a tall bookshelf trembling as if someone had bumped into it. Then it stopped. The next thing I knew, I heard pages flipping again, and I saw a single book slide out by itself and float for a moment before it dropped to the floor with a soft thump. I backed away, holding my hands out in front of me, trying to steady myself. I muttered, "This is not possible." My voice shook. My heart pounded like I had just run a mile at full speed. I felt a surge of panic, and my mouth went completely dry. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were trembling. My thoughts jumbled together. I couldn't think of a logical explanation for what I was seeing. I pushed the shelves aside and took a few quick steps back toward the main aisle. That's when I saw a shape move between the rows, just a flicker of motion from the corner of my eye. I turned my head and caught a glimpse of something dark moving swiftly behind a stack of books. It disappeared into the next aisle. I moved closer, calling out, "Hey, who's there?" My voice echoed. I heard that same laugh again, louder this time, almost mocking me. My heart hammered in my chest. My legs felt weak, and I leaned against a table to keep myself upright. I decided to go after it. I didn't want to run away without knowing what was happening. I rounded the corner and looked down the next aisle. No one was there. I heard a scraping sound behind me and spun around, but again, nothing was there. My breath came in rapid bursts and my hands tingled from the surge of adrenaline. I thought about leaving everything behind and sprinting out of the library, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt drawn to figure out who or what was messing with me. I retraced my steps and headed toward the small reading nook in the far corner, near the locked archive room. The door to the archive was shut, like always, but I heard soft whispers on the other side. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard faint voices, maybe 2 or 3. They were speaking too quietly for me to make out words. My pulse pounded in my ears. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked. No answer, just a sudden silence, as if those whispers vanished the second I touched the door. I stood there, not sure what to do. Then I heard a sound behind me like books sliding across a table. I turned around and saw a figure standing at the end of the aisle, barely visible in the dim light. It looked like a person, but I couldn't make out any details. My heart felt like it stopped. The figure tilted its head, as if it was curious about me. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My throat tightened, and the shape vanished around the corner. I ran after it. I reached the corner in seconds, but there was nobody there. I reached out and touched the end of the shelf. The wood felt solid and cool. I heard the sound of laughter again from somewhere behind me, and I whipped around. The figure was now at the opposite end of the library, near the front desk. I saw it glide behind the desk, out of sight. I couldn't see any features on it. It was just a dark shape, but I felt like it was looking at me. My stomach churned and my legs shook. I wanted to call campus security, but my phone was back in my bag near the entrance. I started walking in that direction. My footsteps felt heavy. My mind raced and I kept glancing over my shoulder. I half expected the figure to appear right in front of me. The overhead lights flickered again. and I saw a reflection in the polished floor of something moving behind me. I spun around, my entire body tense. I held my breath. Nothing. The reflection vanished. I kept going, forcing my feet to move forward. I reached my bag and grabbed my phone. My hand trembled so much that I almost dropped it. I unlocked the screen, ready to call for help. Then I stopped. I hesitated, worried that no one would believe me. My heart pounded, and I felt a drip of sweat roll down the side of my face. I decided to at least text a friend, but I had no signal inside these thick walls. I glanced around, trying to decide if I should run outside to get a better signal or keep investigating. Then I heard the scraping of a chair across the floor in the far corner. I turned around and saw that one of the chairs at a study table had moved out from under the desk. It was now a few feet away, as if someone had pushed it back to stand up. I didn't see anyone. My throat felt tight again. My skin felt clammy, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I clutched my phone and started backing away toward the entrance. Before I reached the door, I heard the books I had left on the table begin to slide. I spun around and saw them moving on their own, inching toward the table's edge. One volume fell off the side, landing face down with a dull thud. I let out a startled gasp. My muscles felt stiff, and my heart beat so hard I thought I might pass out. I took a shaky step forward, then another until I was close enough to pick the book off the floor. I did it carefully, as if it were some fragile object. The silence around me felt heavy, like the air had grown thick. I set the book back on the table. Then I heard a whisper near my ear, a faint breathy sound that made every muscle in my body tense. I jerked away, my heart racing, and turned around. No one stood behind me. My legs felt numb. I took a few steps backward, my eyes darting around, scanning the shelves, the tables, the corners. Then I heard another laugh, this time softer, almost right behind me. I let out a sharp cry and sprinted for the door. My pulse pounded in my ears and my lungs burned. I didn't care about the lights anymore. I didn't care about the research books. I just needed to leave. I reached the exit and shoved the door open, stumbling out into the hallway. My breath came in ragged bursts, and I bent over, trying to steady myself. The corridor lights felt too bright, and the air smelled cleaner out there. I looked back into the library for a moment. It looked calm and ordinary from the entrance, like nothing strange had happened at all. But my whole body was trembling. I decided I was done for the night. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the empty building. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from behind those glass doors. I refused to look back again. I focused on the exit sign up ahead, the dull glow of the fluorescent light guiding me out. When I finally reached the main exit, I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool night air. My body felt shaky, and my shirt clung to my back with sweat. I stood there for a moment, breathing in gulps of fresh air, trying to calm the thudding in my chest. I looked at the clock on my phone. It was 1:45. I realized I'd only spent about 15 minutes in that unsettling situation, but it felt like hours. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand and started walking across the quad toward my apartment. My mind was racing with questions, but I tried to push them aside. I needed to get away from the building, away from the library and whatever had been waiting in there. I reached my place, threw my bag on the couch, and locked the door behind me. My hands were still shaking, and my throat felt parched. I grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen and gulped it down. My heart rate finally began to slow. I kept replaying the events in my head. The laughter, the footsteps, the books moving by themselves, the shape in the aisles. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I didn't want to think about it anymore. I needed to sleep, or at least try. I slumped onto my couch, stared at the ceiling, and wondered if I should tell anyone at the university. I wasn't sure how they'd react. I still don't have a rational explanation for what happened, but I know what I saw and heard. Even now, I can still feel the prickle on my skin when I remember that laugh echoing around me. I haven't gone back to that library alone after hours since that night. Sometimes when I'm in bed, I recall the sound of those pages flipping by themselves, and I feel that same tightness in my chest. I remind myself I'm safe here, but my body still tenses. I can't shake the memory, and I guess I never will. It was close to midnight. I was tired of staring at the ceiling in my bedroom. My sheets were tangled around my legs, and the stale air in my apartment was making me feel more restless. I needed to clear my head, so I decided to go for a run. I threw on a pair of sweatpants, laced my sneakers, and pulled a light jacket over my shirt. I didn't expect much from a run at that hour, but I thought the cool air might help me unwind. I left my apartment without bothering to lock the door from the inside. I just turned the key from the outside and started jogging down the sidewalk. The park was only a few blocks away. The streetlights cast dull circles on the pavement, and I noticed only one or two cars passing in the distance. I could hear my own footsteps on the concrete. My breath felt shallow from the tension of not sleeping, and I hoped the exercise would tire me enough to finally get some rest. I reached the park's entrance, saw the tall iron gates, and noticed the security guard's small booth by the side. The guard usually sits there and greets people, but tonight the booth's light was on while the guard himself was slumped in a chair. His cap was tilted over his face, and he wasn't moving. I walked past the booth and stepped onto the gravel path inside the park. The place was silent except for the crunch of the stones under my feet. The lamps along the trail were spaced out, leaving a few dark patches between them. The air smelled like damp grass. My breath was puffing out in little clouds. I tried to focus on the sound of my own steps, hoping the repetitive rhythm would relax me. I decided to do a slow lap around the main path. I leaned forward into a jog, feeling a slight burn in my calves. I passed a couple of benches on my left. One of them had a crumpled paper cup on it, and the other was empty. A few trees stood in the distance, their branches barely moving in the still air. After a minute or two, I noticed a faint smell that I couldn't place at first. It was sharp, almost chemical. I slowed down to a walk and inhaled again. It reminded me of sulfur or burnt matches. That smell caught me off guard. It felt out of place in the middle of a park at night. I glanced around, but I didn't see any fire or smoke. I kept moving, trying to ignore it, but it lingered. Then I heard something that made me tense up. Heavy footsteps on the gravel behind me. They were not in sync with mine. I stopped walking, and the footsteps stopped too. The hair on the back of my neck rose. I turned around slowly and saw a huge black dog standing a few yards away. Its body was larger than any dog I'd ever seen. Its shoulders were thick, and its legs were muscular. The street lamp behind it cast a dull glow, but I could see the outline of its fur clearly. It looked rough and dirty, like it was caked with mud or something worse. Its eyes were bright red, like two small, glowing embers. It just stood there, staring at me, completely still. I didn't know what to do, so I stood in place for a few seconds. My chest tightened and my mouth went dry. My first thought was to avoid sudden movements, the way people say you should handle an aggressive dog. But this one wasn't barking or growling at first. It was just watching me. My mind started racing with questions. Where did it come from? Why did it look so massive? Why did it smell like sulfur? I took a step back, and that's when I heard a low rumble from its throat. It wasn't a typical dog growl. It was deep, and I felt it in my ribcage. My stomach flipped. I forced myself to breathe, but my breath came out shaky. My hands felt clammy, and I could feel my heart hammering against my chest. I told myself not to panic. I glanced behind me, thinking I could slip away quietly. But as soon as I moved my feet, the growl got louder, and I felt a chill run through my entire body. I decided to turn around and run. My legs reacted before my brain fully agreed with the plan. I sprinted, pushing off the gravel as hard as I could. My lungs burned with every step, and the air felt cold against my face. The wind whipped past my ears, and my heartbeat pounded in my head. I risked a quick look behind me while I was running, expecting to see that black shape chasing after me. But in that brief glance, I saw the dog standing in the same spot, still watching. It didn't move. That confused me. and it also scared me more. Why wasn't it chasing me? What was it waiting for? I didn't want to hang around to find out. I kept running until I reached the park exit. The gate was still open, and the security guard in the booth was still asleep. My chest felt tight and my legs were shaking. I leaned on the gate's metal bars to catch my breath, trying not to collapse. Then I looked over my shoulder one more time and saw the faint outline of the dog under one of the distant lamps. It hadn't followed me, but it was facing me, those red eyes still visible even from far away. My hands were trembling. I wanted to shout for the guard, but my voice felt caught in my throat. I swallowed a few times, then finally managed to croak out, "Hey, wake up!" My voice echoed, but the guard only stirred a little and went back to snoring. The booth's door was slightly ajar, and I considered stepping in to shake him awake. But a sudden jolt of fear stopped me. I thought, if that dog sees me going inside, will it charge? Would I be trapped in there with a half-asleep guard? I took a deep breath and decided to leave the park first. I walked backward a few steps to make sure the dog wasn't moving, then turned and rushed down the sidewalk. I felt my heartbeat throbbing in my temples. My arms were shaking. I looked over my shoulder every few seconds, worried I might see that black shape closing in on me. But the street behind me was empty. The only sounds were my own hurried footsteps and the distant hum of city lights. Once I got about a block away, I stopped near a street lamp and hunched over, putting my hands on my knees. My lungs ached and sweat was dripping down my forehead. My mind was spinning with questions. I tried to piece everything together and figure out what had just happened. A dog that big with those kinds of eyes shouldn't exist. The smell of sulfur didn't make any sense, and the way it just stared at me felt unnatural. For a moment I thought about going back with a flashlight or maybe calling the police, but then I imagined trying to explain it. There's a giant black dog in the park with red eyes and a smell like sulfur. I doubted they would take me seriously, and I also didn't want to lead anyone into danger if that dog really was vicious. I stood there, feeling stuck, wondering if I should just go home and pretend it never happened. My building was still 2 blocks away, so I jogged the rest of the distance, looking around every few steps. The sidewalks were empty, and most of the windows I passed were dark. A few windows had TVs flickering inside, but I didn't see any people. The silence felt oppressive, and I couldn't stop thinking about the dog. I arrived at my building, unlocked the front door, and hurried up the stairs to my apartment on the 2nd floor. Inside, I flipped on every light I could. The fluorescent bulb in my kitchen flickered a few times before staying on. I dropped my keys on the table and braced myself against the kitchen counter. My shirt was damp with sweat, and my jacket felt too hot on my body. I shrugged it off and tossed it on a chair. My pulse was still racing. I took a few sips of water, but my hand was shaking so much that some of the water dribbled down my chin. I leaned against the counter and tried to calm myself. I looked around my apartment, focusing on the small details: the clock on the wall ticking loudly, the hum of the refrigerator, the glow of a street lamp through the window. I told myself I was safe now. There was no sign of that creature. But my mind kept replaying the image of those red eyes and the way the dog just stood there, staring. After a few minutes, I moved to the living room and sank onto the couch. My legs felt like jelly, and I didn't trust myself to stand for long. I tried turning on the TV to distract myself, but the flickering images of late-night infomercials only irritated me. I turned it off and just sat there, listening to my heart slow down bit by bit. My breathing was still uneven. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the outline of that animal, the shape of its massive shoulders, the brightness of its eyes. I wondered if maybe I had imagined it, but the physical details were too vivid. My body's reaction was too intense. The sweat, the trembling, the panic. I didn't just invent that out of thin air. Plus, the smell of sulfur had been real enough to sting my nostrils. I couldn't ignore that. I decided to check the clock. It was almost 1:30 in the morning. The night was still dragging on, and I felt more awake than ever, despite how exhausted I'd been earlier. I thought about calling a friend, but I knew nobody would appreciate a call at that hour. My hands were still unsteady as I gripped my phone. Part of me wanted to talk about it, to see if maybe there was some rational explanation, but I couldn't handle the conversation right then. My head was spinning. I got up and walked to the bathroom. I turned on the light and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was sticking to my forehead and my eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. I splashed water on my face, feeling the coolness trickle down my chin and neck. That helped a little. My mind cleared just enough for me to think about what I should do next. I paced around the apartment. I checked the locks on the front door twice. I looked out the window to the street below and didn't see anything unusual. A single street lamp lit the sidewalk. Everything seemed empty. No sign of any black dogs lurking around. My shoulders relaxed slightly. The night outside felt quiet and still. But even with the door locked and the lights on, I couldn't shake the sense of unease. I considered making some coffee, then realized that was the last thing I needed. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and forced myself to drink it slowly. I thought about going online to see if there were any reports of stray dogs in the area, but I also felt a strange reluctance. I wasn't sure I wanted to read any horror stories or conspiracy theories that might make my anxiety worse. I sat on the edge of my couch again and stared at the wall. My legs were tingling from the run, and the adrenaline was still wearing off. My mind kept drifting back to the park, to the way the path looked under the dim lights, to the smell of damp grass mixed with that sulfur odor. I remembered the security guard, asleep in his booth. He had no idea what was a few yards away from him. I wondered if he would still be there in the morning, unaware of anything out of the ordinary. My rational side started to speak up. Maybe it was just a very large dog that somehow wandered into the park. Maybe the red eyes were just a trick of the light. And maybe the sulfur smell was coming from somewhere else, like a busted sewer line or chemicals from a nearby building. But a part of me didn't believe any of that. I remembered the growl. It sounded more like a rumble than a dog's snarl, and the size of the animal. That wasn't normal. I'd seen large dogs before, but this one was massive, almost surreal in its proportions. My chest felt tight again when I replayed that moment in my head. I shook out my arms and tried to loosen my stiff shoulders. My mouth still tasted bitter with fear. I found myself wishing I had never left my apartment that night. I wondered if I would have been better off tossing and turning in bed until dawn instead of going on that stupid late-night run. Time seemed to slow down. I felt like I was waiting for something. My eyes kept darting to the window even though I knew there was nothing out there. I tried to distract myself by picking up a magazine from the coffee table, but I couldn't focus on the words. I tossed it aside and stood up. My feet paced across the living room again, the floor creaking under my weight. I didn't know how I was going to sleep after this. After a while, I decided to take a quick shower. My skin was sticky with sweat, and I thought hot water might calm my nerves. I locked the bathroom door even though I lived alone. I adjusted the temperature and stepped into the tub. The water drummed against my back. I let it run over my head and closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation of the water pounding my tense muscles. I tried to push the memory of the dog out of my mind at least for a moment. When I was done, I dried off and slipped into a fresh set of clothes. I turned off the bathroom light and walked back into the living room, feeling slightly cleaner but no less uneasy. I noticed the time on my phone. It was almost 2:15 in the morning. I turned down the lights except for the small lamp near the couch, then settled in. I wasn't sure if I could sleep, but I didn't want to stay awake pacing around the apartment until sunrise. I lay down, pulling a thin blanket over myself. The couch cushions were lumpy, and my back ached a bit. I stared at the ceiling, the lamp casting a dim glow across the room. Every small noise, pipes settling, the fridge humming, made me jump. My thoughts kept wandering back to the park, to that heavy breath I thought I heard, to those red eyes. My pulse still felt a little too fast. Eventually, I think my body just gave in. My eyes grew heavy. Before I drifted off, I found myself hoping that I'd wake up the next day and realize the whole thing was some kind of hallucination from lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sweat, The panic, the shaking in my legs, all of that was real. There had been something in the park. I'd seen it. I'd heard it. And that feeling of being watched, it still lingered. I didn't dream that night. Or if I did, I don't remember it. I only remember jarring awake a few hours later, my neck stiff, my mouth dry. The sun was just starting to rise and a thin orange light peeked through the window. My first thought was to check the time. It was nearly 6:30 in the morning. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and felt my muscles protesting. The events of the previous night came rushing back. My heart sank. I knew that what I had experienced wasn't going to vanish with the morning light. I stood up and walked to the window. The street looked ordinary. People heading out for early shifts, a few cars passing, and some neighbors walking their dogs. None of them looked remotely like the creature I'd seen. I let out a shaky breath. I told myself that if I went back to the park in broad daylight, I probably wouldn't find anything out of the ordinary. The guard would be awake, people would be jogging or walking their own pets, and life would move on as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget that dog's massive shape, or the sulfur smell, or the glowing eyes that tracked my every step. My body remembered the immediate terror. My legs still felt weak. I didn't know if I would ever set foot in that park at night again, and I had no idea if I'd ever see that creature again. At that moment, all I cared about was surviving the next day and figuring out how to handle my fears. I grabbed another bottle of water, downed it, and stood there in my living room, feeling that chill creep up my spine once more. I knew I would never look at the park the same way again, and I knew that some things, once you've seen them, you can't unsee. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Then I decided to get dressed for work, hoping that the routine might distract me from the memory of that dog and its silent, menacing stare. But a part of me stayed on high alert, waiting for the next time I might cross paths with that thing. And I dreaded the thought that, if it ever appeared again, I might not be so lucky to just run away. I heard the first set of footsteps on my very first night in this house. I was exhausted from unpacking and my mind felt raw from the long drive. I thought I was imagining things. The floorboards overhead creaked in a steady rhythm. They moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, then paused, then started up again. I stood in the hallway, staring at the spot on the ceiling where the sound seemed loudest. My eyes moved to the old wooden panel up there. It was an access door to the attic. It was sealed with a rusty padlock and some thick nails. I felt a chill roll down my neck. I came here because I needed a quiet place to work on my book. My plan was simple: fix up this old countryside house, settle in, and write. My friend said the isolation would help me focus. The property looked peaceful from the outside. A small front yard with overgrown grass, a few empty flower beds, a couple of old oak trees. The house itself was a single-story structure, but it had a corridor in the center with a small entrance to the attic. The real estate agent mentioned nothing about the attic, except that it was used for storage years ago. I didn't ask many questions. I only cared that the place was cheap and private. On my first official walkthrough, I noticed the attic door. It was a rectangular panel set in the ceiling, near the far end of the hallway. It had a padlock. Someone had driven a few nails around the edges, hammering it shut. At the time, I thought it was odd, but I figured the previous owner wanted to store junk up there and didn't want trespassers or animals. I made a mental note to check it later. Then I forgot about it as I focused on setting up my makeshift office and organizing the kitchen. That first evening was uneventful until I tried to fall asleep. Then I heard it. Slow, faint footfalls coming from above. I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling. My bedroom sits under the attic. The footfalls seemed to move to the far side of the attic, near the hallway. I waited and listened. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was my imagination. The house was old. Wooden beams expand and contract. Wind rattles the rafters. I tried to calm down. Eventually, the sound stopped. The next morning, I ate breakfast in the small kitchen. I tried to focus on writing. I opened my laptop at the dining room table. My fingers hovered over the keys, but my mind went back to those footsteps. My eyes wandered to the corridor. Sunlight came in through a dusty window at the end of the hall. The attic entrance was in shadow. It looked like an ordinary piece of wood. The padlock was rusted. The nails stuck out at awkward angles. None of it looked disturbed. I decided to ignore it. Maybe it was just the house settling. That day passed without incident. I typed a few pages, checked the plumbing, and explored the property. There's a small shed behind the house. It has old gardening tools, a half-broken lawnmower, and a stack of unused wooden planks. I found a rusted ladder leaning against the shed. I figured I could use it to reach the attic door if I ever decided to open it. At that moment, I didn't feel the need to. I was more concerned with clearing out the inside of the house. The smell of dust and stale air filled every room. I needed to keep the windows open. At night, the temperature dropped, so I had to close them again. That second night, I heard the footsteps again. They were slower this time. They started around midnight. My head felt heavy from the day's work. My eyes burned from staring at my laptop screen. The sound kept me awake for at least an hour. Then it stopped. I slept with the blankets pulled tight around me. The third night, I did my best to ignore the creaking. But I couldn't pretend anymore. It was too consistent. The footsteps sounded like they belonged to a real person, pacing back and forth. I felt trapped. My bedroom was directly under that attic. I started sweating. My skin felt clammy. My heart raced. I got out of bed and turned on the lights in the hallway. I looked up at the attic door. Everything still appeared sealed. The lock was in place. The nails were not pulled out. No gaps. Yet I heard the floorboards bending on the other side of that panel. I decided to check the attic the next day. After breakfast, I went out back, grabbed the tall ladder, and hauled it inside. I propped it against the wall beneath the attic door. It felt steady enough. I climbed up slowly, my feet pressing down on each rung. My hands felt sweaty against the ladder. The wood of the door looked old and splintered. The padlock had a thick coat of rust. I pulled on it. It stayed put. The nails around the edges were hammered in deep. I didn't see any sign that someone had pried them loose. Yet I had no doubt something had been moving around up there. I glanced at the door's surface. A thin layer of dust clung to it. There were no markings on the outside. I ran my fingertips over the wood. I didn't find any cracks or holes. I didn't hear anything. I climbed down, put the ladder away, and tried not to think about it. But I felt uneasy all afternoon. Later that evening, my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see if there was another entrance to the attic. I inspected the outside of the house. I walked around, looking up at the roof. It's a simple gabled roof with a few missing shingles. I saw no external hatch or door. No broken window on the second floor because there is no second floor. The only way in or out of that attic had to be through the panel inside. That meant no raccoon or cat could wander in unless there was some hidden hole. I looked for vents or cracks in the siding. I found nothing big enough for an animal of any significant size. That made me more nervous. That night, I waited in the hallway with the lights off. I kept my ears open. The house was silent. I could hear my own breathing. My palms felt damp. After about an hour of standing there in the dark, I heard the first creak. It came from above. My neck tensed up and my shoulders felt stiff. I tried to stay calm, but my breathing got shallow. The footsteps moved from the center of the attic toward my left. Then they stopped. I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried to make sense of it. There was no reason for a person to be up there. I crept toward the bedroom and shut the door. I couldn't relax. My thoughts started to circle. What if someone was camping up there? But the locked panel didn't look tampered with. Maybe the house was playing tricks on me. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I grabbed the ladder again. I decided to look for any sign of disturbance on the attic door that I might have missed before. I went up and inspected the padlock more carefully. I touched the metal. It felt cold. I checked the nails around the edge. None of them seemed loose. Then I ran my hand over the thin dust layer on the outer surface. My hand left a clear mark. I didn't see any other marks. It seemed undisturbed from below. But the footsteps were real. My gut told me to knock. That felt silly. I knocked 3 times. The sound echoed in the attic. I heard nothing back. No movement. No shuffle. Silence. I stepped down. I put the ladder away. I felt like an idiot, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. That afternoon, I tried to distract myself with some cleaning in the living room. I pulled old wallpaper off the walls and discovered mold in a corner. I spent 2 hours scrubbing with bleach. The smell burned my nose. Then I hammered in a loose floorboard near the window. I tried to forget about the attic. As evening came, I set up a couple of lamps in the hallway and aimed them at the attic door. My plan was to see if anything changed overnight. Maybe I'd see the door move, or I'd hear something that would give me more clues. Around midnight, I sat on the floor at the end of the hallway with a blanket around my shoulders. The house was cold. My back hurt from sitting on the hard floor. I listened. I waited. Around 1 a.m., the footsteps started again. They moved above me, across the attic. I lifted my phone and tried to record, but I only caught faint creaking noises. The footsteps stopped after a few minutes. The attic door never moved. The padlock stayed in place. In the morning, I climbed up again to look at the dust on top of the door. I saw my old handprint from the day before, but now there were new smudges in the dust. They looked like footprints in powder, except they were on the upper side of the door's frame. I couldn't see them clearly, but it seemed like small patches of dust were missing, as if someone or something had stepped near the edges. My chest tightened. I stepped back down, feeling lightheaded. Something was moving up there, but it didn't want to open the door. It also didn't want me to open it. I decided to check the rest of the house for hidden entrances. I opened closets, moved furniture, checked every corner. I tapped on the walls, looking for hollow spots. Nothing seemed suspicious. The place was old, but it didn't have secret rooms or trapdoors that I could find. After that, I went outside to examine the roof again. I used binoculars this time. I walked around the perimeter of the house. The shingles looked worn, but I saw no openings big enough for a person. I felt stuck. Either I was losing my mind or something really strange was happening in that attic. That night I felt exhausted and decided to go to bed early. Around 11 p.m., the footsteps returned. I was half asleep, but they jolted me awake. My heart thudded in my chest. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. The steps were soft, like someone in socks. They paused above my bedroom door, then shifted toward the hallway. I heard a faint scratching sound. I didn't move. My hands were cold. I wanted to hide under the blanket, but that made me feel trapped. So I just lay there, eyes open, muscles tense. The scratching stopped. The footsteps moved again, a few slow paces, then silence. My ears strained for any further sound, but I heard nothing. Eventually, my eyes closed. I slept, but I had uneasy dreams. In the morning, I felt drained. My head pounded. My stomach was sour. I forced down some coffee, then stared at my notebook. I was supposed to be writing, but I couldn't concentrate. The attic problem consumed my thoughts. I wanted to open that door. I wanted to see what was inside, but the nails in the padlock were solid. I didn't have bolt cutters. I could have driven into town to get some, but something inside me hesitated. I felt a strange sense of caution, like opening that door might trigger more trouble. Still, I had to do something. I searched the tool shed again. I found a heavy crowbar. It was slightly bent, but it might work. I picked it up and walked back inside. I set up the ladder. I climbed up. I placed the crowbar under the edge of the attic door. I tried to apply pressure. The nails refused to budge. The padlock was attached to a metal latch bolted into the wood. I leaned all my weight on the crowbar. The door creaked but held firm. I felt the ladder wobble. That moment of instability scared me. I pictured myself crashing to the floor. My stomach lurched. I decided to stop before I broke my neck. I climbed down, set the crowbar aside, and sat on the floor for a moment. My hands were trembling. I felt the taste of metal in my mouth. My heartbeat took a while to settle. For the rest of that day, I tried to ignore the attic. I worked in my office area, sorting through old books and random junk left behind. I found a few receipts and letters from decades ago. They were mostly related to property taxes and maintenance. None of them mentioned the attic. None of them explained why someone would lock it so thoroughly. As night approached, I felt a lump in my throat. I dreaded hearing those footsteps again. I considered sleeping in the living room, but that would mean I was still under the same roof. It wouldn't make much difference, so I stayed in my bedroom. I lay on my bed, fully dressed, staring at the dark ceiling. The footsteps started at midnight. This time, they felt heavier. The boards creaked louder. I sat up and turned on the bedside lamp. I kept my eyes on the ceiling. The sound moved toward the hallway. I heard a faint thud. Then everything went quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I got out of bed, opened the bedroom door, and stepped into the hallway. The overhead light was on. The attic door looked the same. I didn't see any movement, but I felt unsettled. The air felt chilly. My arms were covered in goosebumps. I stood there for several minutes, waiting to see if anything else happened. Nothing did. I went back to bed around 2 a.m. and dozed off from sheer exhaustion. This pattern continued for several more nights. Each night, the footsteps varied in intensity. Sometimes they were faint. Sometimes they were louder. I tried everything I could think of. I tried talking through the door. I tried recording the sounds. I tried placing flour on the hallway floor beneath the attic door to see if anything might drop down or disturb it. In the morning, the flour was untouched. The padlock never moved. The nails never pulled out. But I kept seeing slight changes in the dust on the door's upper surface whenever I climbed up to inspect it. Little smears, little signs that something, or someone, was up there. I've been here for a couple of weeks now. I can't sleep properly. I feel anxious all day. My writing is suffering. I haven't produced more than a few pages. The footsteps in the attic won't stop. Whoever or whatever is up there doesn't want me to open that door. I feel that whenever I climb the ladder. My skin prickles. My heart races. It's like an unspoken warning. So far, I haven't broken the lock or removed the nails. I can't explain why, but it feels wrong to force my way in. I plan to leave it alone for now. I'm still here because I don't want to run away from this house. I paid good money for it. I wanted a peaceful place to work. Instead, I got an attic I can't access, and footsteps that keep me up at night. I still don't know who or what is moving around up there. I only know it doesn't appreciate my curiosity. Every night I lie in bed, waiting for the sounds to begin. They always do. My body tenses up. My heartbeat drums in my ears. My mouth goes dry. I keep hoping it'll stop. But it never does. And every morning I see fresh signs in the dust. New scuff marks, new patches where the dust has been disturbed. I leave them alone. I don't try to clean them. I don't want to invite more activity. This is my life now. I've got an old house in the countryside, an unfinished book, and footsteps above me that won't go away. I'm not sure what I'll do next. Maybe I'll call a locksmith. Maybe I'll hire someone else to open that door. Or maybe I'll learn to live with it. All I know is that I can't stand in that hallway at night without feeling my chest tighten and my hands shake. Something's up there. It doesn't want to be disturbed. I have no idea how long this will continue, but I know I'm not imagining it. I hear the footsteps. I see the changes in the dust, and I feel a presence every time I stand under that sealed panel. I can't prove any of it, but I know it's real. I felt my heart pounding the moment I saw the black sedan at the third intersection that night. I had been out riding with my friend Marcus for an hour or so, but the car only showed up around midnight. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, a random sedan pulling up to the same red lights we did. But then it appeared again at the next intersection, and then again at the one after that. It moved slowly, with no headlights, which made it stand out even more. I tried to keep calm, but I felt a rush of tension every time I glanced back and saw those dark windows sliding through the shadows. I met Marcus in the parking lot of a closed hardware store earlier that night. We both like to ride late, mostly because the streets are emptier. We usually start in a well-lit area, then move outward toward the quieter sections of town. That night was no different. We warmed up near a few closed shops, chatting and checking our bikes. His was a sleek road bike with thin tires and an aluminum frame. Mine was a heavier hybrid, but it got the job done. The city lights behind us were dim, and the silence around the abandoned streets felt heavy. Marcus adjusted his seat and said, "Let's head to the old bus depot first." We both knew that area had wide roads and fewer potholes, which made it better for sprinting. We pedaled through 2 blocks, noticing almost no traffic. A couple of stray dogs ran across the street at one point, and I heard the echo of distant music from a house party, but everything else seemed quiet. The air was damp and smelled like wet pavement. My legs felt strong, and I was eager to pick up the pace. We reached an intersection with a broken traffic light. I slowed down, Marcus stopped, and we waited to see if any cars were coming. Nothing. The roads were empty. We went on our way. A few minutes later, we reached another intersection, and that's when I noticed the black sedan for the first time. It crept up on the cross street, barely visible under a flickering street lamp. I couldn't make out a license plate, and the windows were tinted. The headlights were off. It paused there for a moment, then turned and drove away. I looked over at Marcus and said, "Did you see that car? No lights on." He shrugged and said, "Maybe their headlights are broken." I nodded, but I felt my stomach tighten. We kept riding, picking up some speed as we approached a wide avenue that cut through an industrial zone. We passed dark warehouses and locked gates. The streetlights were spaced far apart, leaving large patches of darkness. The only sounds were our bike chains clicking and our tires rolling over the asphalt. My breath came out in soft huffs, and I could see the steam in the cold air. At the next intersection, the sedan appeared again. I spotted it through the corner of my eye. It was idling on the side of the road. The windows were still up and the lights were still off. I could feel my pulse rising as we rode past. Marcus turned his head toward me, and I could tell he noticed it too, but neither of us said anything. I heard a soft hum from the car's engine. It followed us slowly, staying a block behind. When we reached the next right turn, it reappeared from some side street, as if it already knew where we were going. My arms felt tense, and I gripped the handlebars until my knuckles hurt. We kept moving, trying to ignore the car, but it kept showing up. Every other block, there it was, silent and steady. I could hear my own breathing getting heavier, and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. Marcus finally spoke in a hushed voice. "That thing is following us." I felt a chill run through me. I said, "Yeah, let's keep going. Maybe we'll lose it." We turned down a side street with old houses and broken sidewalks. Most of the windows were dark. A few porch lights glowed faintly, but nobody seemed to be around. We pedaled harder, but we didn't see the sedan for a few minutes. I started to relax a bit, thinking maybe we had lost it, until we reached a small plaza with a single street lamp in the center. That's where we stopped to catch our breath. I rested my bike against a rusted bench and wiped the sweat from my forehead. Marcus was breathing hard too, and I could see his chest rising and falling under his jacket. The air felt cold against my face, and I noticed the quiet around us. No cars, no dogs barking, no late-night music. Just an eerie silence. Then I heard a faint engine noise, low and rumbling. I turned my head and saw the black sedan rolling into the plaza. It moved slowly, like it was sliding over the concrete. It passed under the street lamp, and I saw the windows were still up, tinted so dark that I couldn't see inside. I stepped closer to Marcus. The car circled the plaza once. We stared at it, and I felt my hands shaking. The sedan came around and passed right in front of us. That's when we both saw the driver's seat was empty. No one was behind the wheel. The front seats were both empty. I could see the shape of a bench seat or some kind of standard interior, but there was no driver, no passenger. just an empty car moving on its own. Marcus muttered, "What the hell?" I couldn't speak. I felt my throat tighten, and my heart was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. My legs felt shaky, and my palms were damp. The sedan kept rolling, turned a corner, and disappeared behind a row of bushes. The street lamp above us flickered, buzzing for a second. I blinked, and when I looked back in the direction the car went, it was gone. No sign of brake lights, no headlights, no tail lamps, just empty road. I could feel my breathing speed up again. My chest was tight, and my mouth felt dry. Marcus finally said, "That didn't make sense." I nodded. My voice came out shaky when I replied, "Let's just keep moving. I don't want to stay here." We got back on our bikes. Our legs felt tense, but we forced ourselves to ride. We took a few random turns trying to get back to a main road. Eventually, we found a bigger street with some traffic lights and a late-night gas station. We pulled in there, under the bright fluorescent lights. I could smell gasoline fumes and heard the soft hum of a vending machine. A bored cashier stood behind bulletproof glass, scrolling on his phone. I tried to steady my breathing. Marcus parked his bike near the entrance and said, "Dude, what if we report this to someone?" "Like the cops?" I stood next to him and shook my head. "They'd think we're joking. It was an empty car. We can't explain that." He sighed and leaned against the bike rack. I glanced around the station lot, scanning for any sign of the sedan. Nothing. Just a couple of old pickup trucks parked in the corner. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from inside the store. After a few minutes, we gathered ourselves and rode off. The adrenaline rush was wearing off, and I felt exhaustion in my legs. My mind kept replaying the image of that empty driver's seat. We pedaled back toward the hardware store lot, where we started. The ride was quiet, and we didn't see the sedan again that night. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time we passed a dark alley or a side street, I found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that black car coasting behind us. When we finally reached the hardware store, we parted ways. Marcus said, "Man, that was messed up. Let's keep in touch tomorrow." I nodded. He pedaled off toward his home, and I loaded my bike into my van. The night felt strange, and I kept scanning the empty streets around me. My hands were still shaky. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that sedan creeping past me, silent and dark. By morning, I felt restless and tired. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the light, that maybe the windows were so dark I couldn't see the driver. But my gut told me otherwise. Something about that night didn't add up. A few days later, Marcus texted me, "Ready for another night ride?" I hesitated, but I agreed. We had made a habit of these late rides, and I didn't want to back out because of some weird experience. So we met again. This time, we started closer to the outskirts right away, hoping to avoid the industrial zone where we first encountered that car. We stuck to a route we knew well, passing by a row of closed auto shops and heading toward a small cluster of apartment buildings. It was around 11 p.m. The first hour went fine. We rode at a steady pace, chatting occasionally. The night air felt damp again. I could smell the faint odor of trash from some overflowing dumpsters. Street lamps buzzed overhead, and we saw a few stray cats darting between parked cars. At some point, I noticed we were taking deeper breaths than usual, maybe from nerves or just from the tension we carried since the other night. As midnight approached, the wind picked up a little. I felt a chill on my face. Marcus pointed to a cracked pavement section ahead, and we maneuvered around it. Then we turned onto a long, empty road that led to a small park. The place had a couple of streetlights, but they were dim. The park was mostly barren, with a few concrete benches and some dried grass. We followed the curve around the park's perimeter, listening to the rattling of our bike frames. That's when I heard an engine behind us. I glanced back. A black sedan. The same shape. The same tinted windows. No headlights. It was at least a block behind, coasting in our direction. My throat tightened, and I felt the adrenaline kick in. Marcus saw it too and immediately picked up speed. I followed, my thighs burning as we pushed ourselves faster. But the sedan didn't disappear. It stayed on the road, not closing in, not falling back, just lurking at a distance. We rode past a few old houses. I heard a dog barking somewhere, but I couldn't see it. The sedan's engine noise grew louder, then faded, then grew louder again, like it was shifting gears. I could taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. My chest felt heavy. Marcus muttered under his breath, "We can't outrun a car." I just nodded, pedaling harder anyway. We reached another small plaza, a cluster of trees and a single streetlight. The sedan pulled into a parallel street. It drifted behind a chain-link fence. I saw the reflection of the streetlight on its hood for a moment. Then it was gone. I slowed down, peering around the corner. Nothing. I heard only the buzz of the street lamp and the sound of my own breathing. Marcus was panting, looking around with wide eyes. He said, "Let's go somewhere bright. I'm not staying here." We rode off again, sticking to better lit streets. My legs were shaking from the mixture of fatigue and anxiety. A few cars drove past us, normal vehicles with headlights carrying people who probably had no idea what we were experiencing. I wondered if we'd see that black sedan again. Marcus pulled ahead, and I followed, trying to keep up. My back was slick with sweat, and I could feel my heart thumping every time a shadow shifted in my peripheral vision. We eventually made it to a 24-hour convenience store near the main road. Bright neon signs lit up the parking lot. A couple of people stood outside, smoking. We parked our bikes near the entrance. I felt my shoulders relax a little in the glow of the signs and the hum of the freezers inside. I caught my breath, and Marcus and I went inside to grab some water. The clerk barely acknowledged us. I gulped the water, feeling my dry throat scratch. Marcus wiped his forehead, and I noticed how tense his jaw looked. We hung around there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. Neither of us said much. I felt a pit in my stomach, the same unease I felt the first time we saw that car. Part of me wanted to go home right then, but I also felt stubborn. I didn't want to be chased away from something I enjoyed. We decided to finish our ride by heading back the quickest way. We stuck to the main avenue, which was brighter and had a few cars passing by occasionally. The sedan didn't show up again, at least not in any obvious way. But I kept feeling like there was something around each corner, something watching us from the dark. The streetlights made long shadows, and each one made me jump inside. I gripped the handlebars so tight my fingers hurt. Marcus stayed quiet, focused on the road. We reached the parking lot where we had met up. I loaded my bike in my van, feeling the tension in my arms and legs. Marcus put his bike on a rack on his car's trunk. He looked at me and said, "We gotta figure out what's going on. This can't be normal." I agreed, but I had no answers. We both drove off. I checked my mirrors several times, feeling my stomach drop every time I saw a pair of headlights or a dark car behind me. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 a.m. So when I sat in my living room for a while, just thinking about that sedan, I couldn't come up with a reason for why it followed us or how it moved without a driver. Now, every time I grab my bike at night, I feel that tension building in my gut. It doesn't matter if I'm riding alone or with Marcus. I find myself checking every intersection. Every time I see a black car in the distance, my heart picks up speed. Sometimes I'll notice a dark shape lingering at the corner of my eye, and I'll snap my head around, sure I'll see that empty sedan rolling by. Sometimes I think I catch a glimpse of tinted windows or a silent engine. But whenever I look straight at it, there's nothing. Just normal cars or empty streets. Yet I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, drifting through the night, waiting for the next time we decide to ride. Marcus and I still meet up sometimes, though not as often. We usually pick routes with better lighting and fewer abandoned streets. The rides feel different now. My body tenses up the moment the sun goes down. My legs feel stiff, and I'm always scanning the road ahead. The adrenaline that once felt exciting now feels heavy. I sweat more even when the night is cool. I can't help but think about that empty driver's seat, the tinted windows, and the way the car vanished under a flickering street lamp. It's like a shadow that hovers around us, never quite in sight but never fully gone. I don't have an explanation for any of it. I just know what I saw. I know how my skin crawled and how my heartbeat spiked when that car passed by. I know Marcus saw it too, and I know we both felt the same dread. Now, whenever we ride at night, we keep our guard up. We don't linger in dark plazas or stop in places with flickering lights. We stay near main roads, gas stations, convenience stores. But that feeling of being followed never really leaves. Every turn, every corner, I find myself expecting to see that black sedan sliding by without a sound, windows up, headlights off, and no one in the driver's seat. That's where things stand. I still ride at night, though not as far into the outskirts as before. I try to focus on the simple act of pedaling, listening to my wheels spinning on the pavement, feeling the wind in my face. But deep down, I can't ignore the tension in my chest. I can't forget how that sedan appeared at every intersection, and how it vanished in that dimly lit plaza. I have no explanation, and I don't think I'll ever get one. All I know is that I saw an empty car following us, and now I carry that memory with me every time I take my bike out after dark. I took the job because I needed quick cash. Nobody else wanted it. The lighthouse was old, run down and abandoned, sitting on a rocky shoreline that stretched for miles. Tourists showed up during the day, snapping pictures of the rusted tower and the crumbling foundation. At night, there was only me, a small cabin, and a sense of isolation that felt like a punch to the gut. I thought it was going to be easy. Sweep out the cobwebs, make sure the stairs were solid enough for visitors, and report any new structural damage. The job was supposed to last a month. It sounded simple. It wasn't. I drove out on a Monday morning. The sky was gray and the wind carried a cold bite. My first look at the lighthouse came from the coastal road. It rose from a jagged outcrop, an old sentinel with rust along its railing and patches of peeled paint. The windows were boarded up, and the door looked like it had been kicked in at some point. The small cabin where I'd stay was just off to the side, a weather-beaten hut with a single window facing the tower. I parked my car by a broken fence and grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk. My supervisor told me to let myself in. There was no lock on the cabin door, just a heavy metal latch that scraped when I lifted it. Inside, I found a cot, a wooden table, and a single chair. The walls had cracks, and the place smelled like salt and stale air. I didn't waste time. I checked the lighthouse next. The main door creaked when I pushed it open. It scraped along the floor, stirring up dust. The inside felt cold, like the temperature dropped a few degrees once I stepped in. The spiral staircase wound up the middle, metal steps covered in thick rust. I rubbed a hand along the banister to test if it would support my weight. It seemed sturdy enough, but bits of rust flaked off and landed on my boots. My first day involved sweeping the bottom floor and removing junk left by tourists or vandals. Empty cans, broken bottles, cigarette butts. There wasn't much lighting, so I used a flashlight to see the corners. I spotted a few cracks in the wall, but nothing serious. I took note of it on a small notepad, then locked up and returned to the cabin. That night I lay on the cot, feeling the wind rattle the cabin's walls. I tried to read an old magazine I'd brought, but I kept hearing faint sounds outside. Sometimes it was the wind, sometimes it was the ocean crashing against the rocks. Then I heard a soft clanking like chains moving against a metal post. It stopped when I got up to check. I didn't see anything. I shrugged it off as my imagination and went back to my magazine. Sleep came in patches. I'd nod off, jolt awake, check outside, then drift off again. By morning, I felt stiff and tired. The next day, I did more chores inside the tower. I chipped off loose paint and swept the spiral steps, working my way up to the top. It was a long climb. The walls narrowed near the top and the air smelled musty. The lantern room had long been stripped of any working equipment. I found a rusty lamp that looked like it hadn't been functional in decades. The lens was cracked and there was no bulb inside. The power lines were cut ages ago. I just stared at the old apparatus, feeling a sense of emptiness. I knew no one had been up there in a long time. During the day, some tourists showed up, took pictures outside, and left. I reminded them the lighthouse was off limits. They listened mostly, By late afternoon, everything was quiet again. I locked the place up and headed back to the cabin. The wind grew stronger, and the sea churned. Clouds moved in, and it looked like a storm was coming. I spent the evening listening to the rain hammer the roof. Around midnight, I noticed a faint glow through my cabin window. It flickered in the direction of the lighthouse. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the cabin door. The sky was dark and the rain was still falling, but I could see a soft light at the top of the tower. It pulsed, then went dark, then pulsed again. I felt my chest tighten. The electricity had been cut for years. There was no generator. The lantern up there was a rusted relic, yet I was seeing a light. My heart pounded. I pulled on a jacket and jogged across the muddy ground. The wind whipped the rain against my face. I reached the lighthouse entrance, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Water dripped from my hair onto my shoulders. I shone my flashlight on the stairs. They were empty. I heard no sounds except the wind rattling the broken windows. I climbed the steps, keeping one hand on the railing. My breath came in quick spurts. I kept expecting someone to jump out from behind a corner, but nobody did. By the time I reached the top, my legs burned. The lantern room was empty, and the old lamp sat in its usual spot, rusted and unused. It wasn't lit. There were no fresh footprints. The place felt lifeless. I checked around with my flashlight, looking for any sign of recent activity. I found nothing. I stood there listening to my own heartbeat. After a minute, I decided I must have been seeing some reflection from outside, maybe distant boat lights or a trick of the storm. I told myself that and climbed back down. I locked up, returned to the cabin, and dried off. The light didn't appear again that night. Things were calm for the rest of the week. I kept up with my maintenance tasks, patching minor leaks and cleaning off graffiti. Tourists came and went. Nobody reported any strange lights or noises, which made me doubt what I'd seen. I started to relax. Then one night, around 3 a.m, I woke to the sound of chains dragging across concrete. It was loud. It sounded like it came from right outside my cabin. My heart was hammering and my mouth went dry. I stood by the cabin window, peering out. I couldn't see anything. I waited, listening. The noise moved away as if heading toward the lighthouse. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, feeling the cold night air rush over me. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I followed the noise to the lighthouse door. Then it went silent. I heard only the wind. I crept inside and flashed my light around. The bottom floor was empty. The stairs looked like a black coil leading into darkness. I thought I heard a faint scraping sound from above. My stomach tightened. I forced myself to climb. Each step squeaked under my weight. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. A part of me wanted to turn around, but I kept going. I reached the top in near silence. There was no one there. The place was empty. I scanned the room with my beam of light. The old lamp sat in the corner. It was as dark and cold as ever. My heart was still racing. The noise had been too real to ignore. I stood there, unsure if I was losing my mind. Then the wind howled through a crack in the glass. It startled me enough that I almost dropped my flashlight. I left the lantern room and locked the tower behind me. Back at the cabin, I struggled to fall asleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I imagined a figure dragging chains up the spiral stairs. By morning, I had a headache from lack of rest. I tried to focus on my routine the next day. I hammered some loose boards back onto the lighthouse entrance, hoping to keep out random trespassers. I walked around the exterior and noted some new cracks near the foundation. Around midday, a couple of visitors asked if they could peek inside. I said no, telling them it was unsafe. They left without arguing. That afternoon, I found myself staring at the top of the lighthouse, half expecting to see that flicker again. The sky was clear, no sign of storms, so everything looked normal. That night, I sat in my cabin, reading an instruction manual for basic lighthouse maintenance. The place had no electricity, so I relied on a single battery-powered lamp. Sometime after midnight, I sensed movement outside. I heard heavy footsteps on gravel. My stomach twisted. I turned off the lamp, letting the cabin sink into darkness. I went to the window and slid it open a crack. The night air was cold on my face. I heard chains again, heavier than before. They clanged in steady intervals, moving toward the lighthouse. I didn't feel bold. I felt stuck. My legs trembled and my hands were clammy. Still, I forced myself to move. I put on my boots and crept outside. The moon was bright, giving me enough light to see the path. I followed the sound to the lighthouse door. It was open, even though I had bolted it. I walked inside, shining my flashlight around. A chill spread across my arms. The chain sound came from above, a metallic scrape on stone steps. I gulped and started climbing. Every step up felt like a challenge. My breath was quick and I kept shining the light on the stairs, expecting to see a figure, but I found nothing. The sound moved higher each time I ascended. About halfway up, the noise stopped. The silence was worse. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. When I reached the top, my flashlight flickered. I shook it and it came back. The lantern room was empty, no signs of life. I looked at the rusted lamp, expecting something to be different, but it was the same useless hunk of metal. I walked around, shining my beam on the floor. Dust everywhere, no footprints, no marks. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like something was watching me. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw a soft glow from the lantern. I spun around to look directly at it. Darkness. Nothing. My breathing was too loud. I forced myself to calm down. Then I heard a metallic clang on the staircase below. It was loud enough to make me jump. I ran to the spiral steps and aimed the flashlight downward. I saw an empty staircase. My chest felt tight and my mind buzzed with questions. Something was there, but I couldn't see it. I took each step down carefully, trying not to make noise. My flashlight beam shook with my trembling hand. The further I descended, the quieter it got. By the time I reached the bottom, there was only silence. The door was still open, and the wind blew dust across the floor. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I rushed back to the cabin and bolted the door. I spent the next hour pacing. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every time I heard the wind or the creak of the cabin's walls, I froze, worried the chains would start clanging again. Around 4 in the morning, I forced myself to lie down. My eyes felt heavy, and eventually, I drifted off. I woke up late. The sun was high. I found a note pinned to my cabin door from my supervisor, saying they would drop by in a few days to check on the progress. Part of me considered calling him and quitting on the spot, but I stuck around. I told myself I wasn't a coward, that maybe I was just imagining these things because of the isolation. I focused on daylight tasks, staying outside as much as possible. I did small repairs around the property. I ate my lunch on a rock overlooking the sea, letting the crashing waves steady my nerves. That evening, a few tourists arrived late, asking if they could take pictures before sunset. I said it was okay to photograph the exterior. They seemed disappointed they couldn't go inside. After they left, the sun dipped below the horizon, and the temperature dropped fast. I felt an uneasy anticipation for nighttime. I locked the lighthouse door, tested it twice. Then I retreated to my cabin and ate a simple dinner. The wind picked up around midnight, and I heard the familiar moan through the cracks in the cabin walls. I sat in the darkness, waiting. My legs were jittery, and my palms felt sweaty. My flashlight was on the table. Hours passed. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it again, the sound of chains, faint at first, then growing louder. I took a breath and stood up. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The night was cold and the sea was calm. The chain sound seemed to come from the top of the lighthouse this time. I stared up, and my stomach clenched. The light was flickering in the lantern room. It glowed a weak orange, like a flame on the verge of dying out. I couldn't look away. I felt my shoulders tense, and my breathing got shallow. I walked toward the lighthouse, each step heavy. The door was locked, just as I'd left it. Yet I heard the chain scraping behind it. I unlocked it, pulled it open, and felt a rush of cold air. The inside was pitch black, except for my flashlight. I stepped onto the first stair and looked up. There was a soft glow at the top, too faint to be any conventional light. I climbed, forcing my legs to move. My hands felt numb against the metal railing. The chain noise echoed down the staircase. My flashlight flickered again. Halfway up, I heard something shift above me like a heavy weight dragging. My throat went dry. I turned off my flashlight just to see if the glow was real. It was. A weak, orange glow spilled over the upper steps. My heart hammered. I kept climbing in the dark, guided by that eerie light. When I reached the top, I saw the old lantern glowing on its own, even though it was broken and rusted. The chain noise stopped the second I stepped into the room. The lantern flickered and died. Everything went black. I clicked on my flashlight and aimed it at the lantern. It was dark, just a hunk of corroded metal. I heard a final scrape of chains behind me, and I spun around, shining my light on empty air. My pulse pounded in my ears. I walked in circles, checking every corner of the room. I was alone. I felt an icy chill run down my back. My teeth chattered, not from the cold, but from tension. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I wanted to get out of there. I hurried down the steps, stumbling a few times. At the bottom, I locked the door and sprinted to my cabin. I'm still here, but I can't shake the feeling that something wants that lantern lit again. Every night, the chain sounds start, and every night, I check to see if the door is locked. Sometimes the light appears at the top, flickering on and off like a signal that never quite reaches full brightness. I don't know what's causing it. The power's been cut and there's no one around after dark. I've considered leaving, but I need the money. My supervisor will be here in a few days. I'll show him the logs, the locked door, and maybe he'll give me permission to leave early. Until then, I'm stuck, waiting for the chains, waiting for that old lantern to flicker again, and hoping nothing else decides to show itself in the dark. I never expected to get nervous over an empty elevator. It's just a standard piece of machinery with a few buttons and lights. But on my second shift as the overnight janitor in this small commercial building, I realized there might be more going on than just mechanical glitches. The moment I started hearing those footsteps in a place that should have been silent, I felt a wave of unease rush through me. I thought I was losing my mind. When I signed up for this job, I assumed it would be a simple gig. Mop the floors, change a few trash bags, lock up, and keep an eye on the place until morning. Nobody warned me about the elevator or its strange behavior after 2 a.m. My first night went fine. I remember walking around with a flashlight, checking all the offices on each floor, making sure the lights were off. I heard the building's air conditioning system hum in the background. A few times I got spooked by my own reflection in glass doors, but I chalked that up to normal first-day jitters. The corridors were quiet, and the only real excitement was the soda machine in the lobby that kept whirring every time I walked past it. By the time my shift ended, I felt comfortable enough and told myself this would be an easy way to make some money. Before my second shift, I spoke with the building supervisor, a man in his late 50s who insisted everyone call him the syndic. He said something about the social elevator acting up at night. He warned me to be mindful and suggested I avoid it if I didn't have to use it after 2 a.m. He gave me a key for the service elevator instead, in case I needed to move around floors quickly. I asked him if there had been serious issues. He just mumbled something about odd noises and unpredictable movement. He said it mostly happened when there was no one else in the building. Then he shrugged and walked away. I should have taken him more seriously, but I assumed he was exaggerating or playing around. That night, I arrived at around 10 p.m. I checked in with the evening security guy in the lobby. He left at 11 p.m. as usual, and then I was alone in the building. I walked around for a bit, making sure all the offices were locked. Some tenants stay late, especially on the lower floors, so I passed by a few people finishing up paperwork or cleaning their desks. Around midnight, The last person left and told me they wouldn't be back until the morning. I nodded and watched them exit through the front doors. By 12:30 a.m., the entire building was empty, except for me. I went to the building's small security room, which is just a cramped space with a desk, a monitor, and a few chairs. There's a single TV screen that cycles through the security camera feeds. Main lobby, hallway on each floor, basement parking, and the stairwells. I settled in, drinking a cup of coffee from the machine in the corner. The coffee tasted stale, but it kept me awake. Around 1:45 a.m., and I noticed the feed for the social elevator panel showed it on the ground floor, which I expected. I even heard the faint hum from down the hallway. After a few minutes, I saw the elevator on the screen moving slightly, like someone had pressed a button to go up, but no one had come in through the front doors, and as far as I knew, nobody was still inside any of the offices. The elevator doors closed on camera, and it started going up. I tensed up in my chair. I leaned forward, trying to see if there was any figure inside the elevator, but the camera angle on that feed only shows the front panel. It doesn't show the interior. The numbers climbed: first floor, second floor, third floor. It finally stopped on the top floor, which is the 8th. I got up and grabbed my key ring. I walked into the hallway, passing by the elevator bank. Everything was quiet. The social elevator was indeed at the top, so I pressed the button to call the service elevator. I was already feeling a slight chill in my chest. My breathing felt heavier than usual, but I told myself it was nothing. I needed to check the top floor anyway. When the service elevator arrived, I stepped in and pressed the 8th floor button. On the way up, I listened for anything unusual, but it was just the normal sounds of an elevator in motion. Faint mechanical whirring, a bit of rattling, and a stop at the top. The doors opened and I stepped into a dark hallway. The overhead lights were dimmed for the night and everything looked undisturbed. I walked around trying every door. They were all locked. I didn't see any lights under any door. I stood there for a second, listening for footsteps or any sign of movement. There was nothing, just a slight hum from the vents. I called the service elevator again, took it down to the security room, and sat back in front of the camera monitor. The social elevator was showing 8 on the panel. I waited, watching to see if it would move again. It didn't. I decided to do some quick cleaning tasks to pass the time. I emptied trash cans in the lobby and wiped down the front doors. I glanced at my watch. It was almost 2 a.m., a few minutes after 2 a.m., and I heard a ding from the social elevator in the distance. I walked to the security room and looked at the screen. The panel showed it was descending to the lobby. I checked the building's main entrance camera. The door was still locked, and no one was around. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The elevator stopped at the ground floor. On camera, I could see the doors slide open slowly. There was nobody in front of the elevator in the lobby camera feed. I blinked a few times, leaning in closer to the screen. I saw the doors remain open for several seconds and then close again. Then the elevator started going up once more. I muttered to myself, "This is weird." My heart thumped faster than usual. I walked back to the hallway and approached the elevator. I heard it hum above me. I waited, my flashlight in hand, shining it around the empty lobby. The building's overhead lights were still on in the lobby area, but they had that late-night dull glow that always made everything feel slightly eerie. I waited for a minute or two, but nothing happened. I went back to the security room and watched the panel. It was on the 8th floor again. I tapped my finger on the desk, feeling uneasy. Maybe it was just a glitch. Then at around 2:30 a.m., the screen showed the elevator coming back down. This time it stopped on the ground floor and stayed there. I got up and jogged to the lobby. As soon as I reached the elevator, the doors started to open. They creaked, moving slower than I expected. I looked inside. It was empty. The fluorescent light in the elevator flickered once. I leaned forward, shining my flashlight to check every corner of the small space. Nothing. I felt my pulse quicken. I stepped back, and without warning, the doors slammed shut with a loud thud. It startled me so much that I dropped my flashlight. I heard it hit the floor and I scrambled to pick it up. When I stood back up, I saw the elevator panel read B, meaning it was heading down to the basement. I stared at it. feeling sweat form on my forehead. I couldn't believe how abruptly those doors had closed, like someone inside had pressed the door close button with force. But I knew the elevator was empty. I hurried to the stairwell and started descending the stairs to the basement. My legs felt heavy, but I pushed forward, swinging the door open at the bottom. The basement is a parking area with a row of storage rooms and a small mechanical room. The air smelled stale and slightly damp. The lights flickered in the far corner. I heard the elevator's mechanical sounds. It came to a stop, and the doors opened. I couldn't see that from my vantage point, so I moved around a parked car and I froze. I heard footsteps. They weren't mine. They sounded like slow, deliberate steps, echoing on the concrete floor. I aimed my flashlight in the direction of the noise, but I saw nothing except empty space. My pulse pounded in my ears and I felt my breathing get heavier. I took a few steps forward, shining the flashlight around. The elevator doors were open. The interior light was on. The hallway leading to the mechanical room was empty. I didn't hear the footsteps anymore, just my own breath and the low hum of something behind the walls. I called out, "Is anyone here?" My voice sounded shaky. No response. I called out again. Nothing. I stepped into the corridor that leads to the storage rooms. My footsteps echoed, and I felt a chill in the air. I leaned close to one of the storage room doors to listen. Everything was still. I heard a drip of water somewhere. I turned back toward the elevator and saw its doors close on their own. I rushed over, but they shut before I could reach them. Then I watched the elevator panel on the wall. It moved up, going floor by floor, as if it had a mind of its own. I jabbed the call button, but it didn't respond. I felt sweat trickling down the sides of my face. I stood there for a few moments, staring at the elevator panel. The display indicated it went to the 8th floor again. I clenched my fists, trying to calm myself. I walked back up to the lobby via the stairs. On my way, I kept glancing at each floor landing, checking if I could hear anything else. Everything was quiet and still. When I reached the lobby, I went straight to the security room. I slumped in the chair, breathing hard. The monitor showed the elevator at the 8th floor with the doors open. It stayed like that for almost 2 minutes. Then the doors closed, and it started descending again. I whispered to myself, "What is going on?" For the rest of the night, the elevator's panel kept lighting up. I saw it go from the lobby to the basement, back to the top floor, then down to random floors in between. Every time I heard it ding, my body tensed up. I felt like I was waiting for something terrible to happen, but nothing ever did. It was just an elevator moving without a passenger. Sometimes I heard faint noises in the corridors, like soft footsteps or distant tapping on the walls. I never saw anyone. When I walked around the building, I found every door locked, every office empty, every hallway clear. Around 4 a.m., I tried to distract myself by cleaning the staff kitchen on the 2nd floor. I couldn't stop glancing at my watch. I wanted time to pass faster. Whenever I heard a ding or the hum of the elevator, my stomach twisted. I considered calling the supervisor, but it seemed pointless. What would I say? That the elevator was acting strange and I heard footsteps? He had already warned me. I didn't want to come off as frightened or incapable of handling a quiet building at night. I made another round at around 4:30 a.m. I took the service elevator to the 8th floor to double-check the top offices. I walked through the hallway, shining my flashlight in each corner. Everything looked fine. I touched one of the office doors to confirm it was locked. It was solid. I felt the cool metal under my palm. I stood there listening. Nothing. I turned back and walked to the elevator bank. The social elevator was there. The doors were shut, and the panel indicated it was idle. I pressed the button to open it. The doors slid open. It was empty. The light inside flickered again, the same slow flicker I'd noticed earlier. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my temple. I reached in and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and I rode it down alone. On the way to the lobby, I stared at the walls. They were just plain metal panels with a few scratches. The overhead lighting buzzed softly. My reflection in the panel looked tired. I was exhausted, but my nerves were wired. When I arrived at the lobby, the doors opened without a sound. I stepped out quickly, not wanting to linger. The camera in the security room kept rotating through the feeds. I sat down and watched the elevator panel again. For a moment, it stayed at the lobby. Then, just as I reached for another sip of coffee, it showed B. The elevator was going back down. I gripped my cup harder, feeling a jolt of anxiety. I didn't follow it this time. I stayed put and kept an eye on the monitor. I heard the elevator open and close in the basement, then move up to the lobby, then back to the top. This pattern continued until about 5:30 a.m., at which point everything stopped. The elevator settled on the ground floor and stayed there, doors shut. I waited, watching the clock. By 6 a.m., the building's early morning staff started to arrive. The first person in was a woman who works in the small cafeteria on the mezzanine. She greeted me casually. I forced a tired smile and said good morning. I spent the last half hour of my shift picking up trash around the lobby, though there wasn't much to do. I glanced at the elevator occasionally. It stayed still. When the syndic came in, he asked if everything was okay. I just nodded. I told him the elevator was moving around last night, but I didn't see anyone inside it. He shrugged and said he'd heard it does that sometimes. I asked if there was anything else I should know. He said something about an old circuit board and refused to talk more. I clocked out at 7 a.m. and walked outside into the daylight. My eyes felt sore, and my legs were shaky. I didn't know what to make of the entire experience. The footsteps, the slamming doors, the random movements of that elevator. I couldn't explain any of it. I didn't see anyone else in the building. I didn't hear any voices, just those steps in the basement and the faint sounds in the corridors. Yet nothing else happened. Nobody got hurt, and I didn't find any sign of vandalism or break-ins. I went home and tried to sleep, but I kept replaying it all in my mind. The memory of those footsteps in the basement kept my heart rate up. I couldn't relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the elevator doors slamming shut and the empty cabin moving up and down without a passenger. I felt a dull ache in my temples from lack of rest. I can't say for sure what caused it. I haven't told anyone else the details, mostly because I'm still not sure it would make sense. All I know is that on that second night of my new job, I realized this building isn't as normal as it seems. The elevator moves on its own, and sometimes I hear things that shouldn't be there. That's all there is to it. I have a shift again tonight, and I'm trying to mentally prepare. I might spend more time in the stairwell or just keep an eye on that security monitor. If I see the elevator start moving with nobody inside, I'm not sure I'll bother chasing it around again. Maybe I'll just do my rounds and keep my head down. But I can't ignore what happened. I was there. I heard those footsteps. I saw the elevator open its doors when it should have stayed closed. And that's the story of what went down here after 2 a.m. on my second shift as a night janitor in this small commercial building. I still feel the heat in my lungs when I think about that night. The moment my engine started to overheat in the middle of nowhere, I knew I was in trouble. I wasn't prepared for how alone I would feel on that desert road. I want to lay it out exactly as I remember, without fancy descriptions. I just want to tell you what happened, step by step, because even now, it makes my stomach tense up. This is how it went down. I was driving across the desert to reach a small town where I had a work meeting scheduled. I had a beat-up car, an old sedan that usually held together, though it was prone to small problems. The day had been uneventful. The sun was strong, and the air outside was dry, but the car stayed steady for hours. I felt sweaty and a bit numb from sitting so long. The radio crackled with static most of the time, so I turned it off and drove in silence. I kept checking the gas gauge to make sure I had enough fuel. I had water with me and some plastic bottles on the passenger seat. My plan was to drive until about 9 p.m. and find a motel, but around 8 p.m. as it got dark, I noticed the temperature gauge on the dashboard creeping up. I saw the needle inching past the halfway mark, then it rose even higher. I slowed down, hoping to ease the strain on the engine. It didn't help much. The needle kept climbing until it was near the red zone. I pulled over to the side of the road. There was nothing around me. No buildings, no lights, no sign of life. The car hissed when I turned off the engine. I got out and walked around to the front. The hood felt like it was on fire, so I waited a minute before lifting it. Even then, I felt the heat blast my face. I noticed the radiator was steaming. I grabbed a bottle of water from the car and poured some into the radiator. I heard a sharp sizzle, and the water seemed to disappear right away. It made me nervous because I'd never seen it evaporate that quickly. I stood there, tasting dust in my mouth, trying to decide if I should wait for the engine to cool or keep pouring more water. The desert air was warm and my clothes clung to my back. My hands felt shaky. The quiet was overwhelming. There wasn't a single gust of wind. It felt like the world was on pause. I took a step back and looked around. The road stretched in both directions with no lights or signs of civilization. The stars were out, but they gave off almost no real glow. My headlights were off, and I realized how dark the night was. My eyes started to adjust, but that quiet hung in the air. I could even hear my heart beating. It was steady but stronger than usual, like I was on edge. I decided to try again with the radiator. I twisted the cap carefully. Steam hissed out and I jumped back. My hand was shaking more than I liked. I waited a bit, tried the water again, and got the same result. It vanished almost immediately. I muttered a few curses under my breath. I wiped sweat from my forehead. I tried not to panic, but the situation felt wrong. I'd handled overheated engines before, but this was different. It was like the radiator refused to hold any water. I glanced at the dark desert around me. That's when I noticed something strange. There were footprints on the ground in the dusty soil near my car. They looked fresh, but I hadn't heard or seen anyone. I felt my skin prickle. The footprints were scattered, but seemed to head right for where I stood. Yet I was alone. I pointed my flashlight around, scanning the area. I saw only empty desert. I walked a few steps around the car, shining the light on the footprints. They weren't huge, about the size of a normal adult shoe, but I didn't see any sign of the actual person. A chill ran across my arms. I didn't hear breathing or footsteps. I only heard the faint sound of my engine ticking. The footprints led closer to the car and then stopped on the other side of the vehicle, as if someone had circled around. But there was no one there. I kept shining my flashlight, waiting for my eyes to catch a shape. Nothing. Just emptiness. My pulse was faster now, and I felt an urge to shout at whoever might be out there. But I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I stayed close to the car. I didn't want to wander too far and get lost. I felt dryness in my throat, so I took a swig from a water bottle. Then I thought, maybe I should wait in the car for a while. But I didn't like that idea. It felt safer to stay outside where I could move freely. I was torn, and my thoughts spun around in my head. That's when I heard a faint whisper. It was so soft that I wasn't sure if I imagined it. It sounded like hushed voices, but I couldn't pick out any words. My flashlight beam trembled as I aimed it in a wide arc. I saw dust floating in the air. My heart pounded and I felt my jaw clench. I wasn't used to feeling fear like that. I told myself it could be the wind, or maybe my mind was playing tricks. But there was no wind at all. Not even a breeze. I stood still for a moment, listening. Then I heard that whisper again, coming from behind me, or maybe from the side. I spun around. Nothing. It was too dark to see anything that wasn't in the flashlight's path. Then I got the sense that something was moving in circles around me. I caught the edges of footprints in the beam. They looked new. Dust was shifting as if someone had just stepped there. My stomach knotted. My breathing got heavier. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. I said out loud, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky to my own ears. No answer. I checked my phone. No signal. The battery was half full, but that didn't help if I couldn't call anyone. The desert seemed to swallow every sound. I decided to check if the car could still run at all. Even if the engine was hot, maybe I could crawl forward to somewhere safer. I climbed back into the driver's seat, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. The engine tried to start, but it sounded weak. Then it gave out. My headlights flickered but didn't stay on. I groaned and slammed my hands on the steering wheel. I tried again. The engine coughed a bit, but it didn't come to life. I felt stuck. The desert was so dark that I couldn't see the horizon. My flashlight was my only source of light now. I got out of the car again, and that's when I heard a new sound. It was like soft footsteps crunching on the gritty soil, moving closer from behind me. I whipped around with the flashlight, but there was nothing. My arms trembled. It felt like I was being watched from all directions. The footprints on the ground kept appearing in new positions. I began to move in a circle around the car, shining the light everywhere I could. I was breathing hard. My chest felt tight. That whispering continued, coming in short bursts. It felt like a group of voices, but so hushed that I couldn't make out a single sentence. I retreated to the side of the car and leaned against it. My shirt stuck to my back from sweat. My hands felt clammy. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The road was empty and I had no idea how far it was to the next town. I wasn't about to wander into the darkness on foot, so I stayed near the car, scanning the darkness, waiting for something to happen. Time seemed to slow down. The radiator was still hot to the touch and I didn't dare open it again. I thought about pouring more water, but it seemed pointless. The previous attempts evaporated right away. I had no clue why. I kept hearing that same whispering, moving around me. Sometimes it seemed closer, sometimes farther away. I stood there, my flashlight in my right hand, trying not to let fear paralyze me. I started talking to myself quietly, just to hear another human voice. It didn't help much, but it stopped me from feeling like I was in total silence. I said things like, "I'll make it until dawn. Someone will come by." But no cars had passed in hours. The desert nights can be long, and I felt each minute crawl by. After a while, I decided to circle around the immediate area. I walked maybe 20 yards around the car, shining the light on the ground. Everywhere I went, I saw footprints. Some were partial impressions, some more complete. They crisscrossed around the spot where my car was parked. I knelt down to touch one of them. The dust was loose and warm. My fingertips pressed into it. I didn't feel anything unusual, but the footprints looked fresh. I didn't see evidence of them leading off into the distance. They just seemed to appear near my car. That made my chest tighten even more. The whispering grew more frequent. I felt a slight vibration under my feet at one point, like a low rumble, but it stopped after a few seconds. I hadn't seen any headlights from other vehicles. The isolation pressed on me. I swung my flashlight from left to right, trying to catch movement. Maybe I'd see a shape or a shadow. I saw nothing. A wave of nausea hit me from the tension. My hands shook uncontrollably for a moment. I forced myself to calm down, breathe slowly, and take small sips of water. I realized I had to conserve what was left of my water supply, so I tried not to drink too much. I poured a bit on my face to cool off. It felt good for a second, but it dried fast in the desert air. I rested against the trunk of the car for a while. My legs ached from standing. The whispering kept going, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. The footprints kept showing up in different spots around me. I never felt a hand on me, never felt a push or a pull, but I sensed an invisible presence. I kept checking my phone for a signal, but it remained useless. Time crawled, and I struggled to measure it. I could see my watch under the flashlight beam. It was close to midnight at one point, then it dragged on to 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and so on. The night felt endless. By around 3 a.m., my eyes were heavy, but I didn't dare sleep. My nerves were on high alert. Every time I heard a whisper or the crunch of gravel, I jerked my head around. Sometimes I muttered curses at the darkness, demanding that it show itself. Nothing ever did. The footprints kept appearing, though. I sometimes kicked at them, but they would just appear in a new spot a few minutes later. I felt trapped, like there was an invisible circle around me that I couldn't break through. As the hours passed, I thought about trying the car engine again, but I was sure it wouldn't work. I tried once or twice just in case, but it refused to start. The battery seemed to be losing power because the inside lights got weaker each time I tried. I got out and leaned on the hood. The metal was cooler now, but I doubted the radiator would suddenly behave. I didn't open it again. I stayed there in the dark, listening to faint whispers, seeing footprints appear and feeling sweat dry on my skin. Close to dawn, the sky started to lighten. I saw a slight grayish tone on the horizon. I stood there watching it, hoping I could last a bit longer. My heart was still pounding, but the sense of total darkness began to lift. I could make out the shape of the car more clearly. The desert floor around me showed more detail. I started seeing small rocks and uneven patches of dust. The footprints were everywhere. My flashlight was still on, but it was less necessary as the morning light grew. The whispers faded as the sky brightened. I listened carefully, but they became softer and more distant. Eventually, I couldn't hear them at all. I walked around the car again, looking at the footprints in the dim morning light. They formed a patchy ring, as though something had circled me all night. I stared at them for a while, feeling a dull ache in my chest. My nerves were fried, and I felt exhausted. When the sun finally rose, the desert lit up. The air was still cool, but I knew it would get hot fast. I tried the engine one more time, just out of desperation. To my surprise, it sputtered and then roared to life. It choked a bit, but it stayed running. I was too anxious to question it. I got back in, slammed the door, and pressed the gas. The engine struggled, but I managed to pull back onto the road. The temperature gauge stayed steady in the middle, like nothing had happened. I drove slowly, trying not to push my luck. My hands were shaking on the wheel. In my mirror, I saw a haze of dust. I didn't see any footprints behind me, but I didn't look for too long. I just wanted to keep moving. I drove for about an hour before I reached a small gas station. I pulled in, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, breathing. My body felt stiff. I noticed the radiator wasn't steaming. I got out and walked around. The car seemed normal. I topped off my coolant without any problems. The station attendant came out to chat, but I didn't tell him everything. I just said I had engine trouble in the night. He checked the radiator for me and shrugged. Everything looked okay. I thanked him, got back in, and continued on my way. I kept looking at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see fresh footprints. But I saw only the empty road. I felt drained and kind of numb. I reached my destination a few hours later, but the memory of that night stuck with me. Even now, I can't explain how it happened or why the water kept evaporating. I can't explain those footprints that showed up when no one was there. I don't know what I heard whispering all night long. I just know it was real enough to make my heart pound, and I won't forget it. When I tell people about it, I don't dress it up with fancy language. I just say I was alone in the desert, my car failed me, and something else was out there that wouldn't let me leave until sunrise. That's the truth. I still feel a tightness in my chest when I remember the first time I heard that dragging sound at 2 a.m. I'm not the kind of person who jumps at every little noise, but this was different. My heart pounded, and I felt sweat gathering on my forehead. Something was off, and I knew it. It all began when I brought home that cloth doll with the strangely realistic face. I found it in a thrift shop downtown, tucked behind a stack of worn-out picture frames. The minute I saw it, I felt an odd urge to pick it up. I'm into crafts, so I figured it might be a cool piece to study and maybe replicate. I never questioned why that doll's face looked so human, or why its eyes seemed so intense. I'm a pretty ordinary guy who enjoys creating handmade items. I experiment with different fabrics, threads, and small tools. My studio is a converted spare room in my apartment. I like to keep everything neatly organized. My sewing needles go in a wooden tray. My pins line up in a small magnetic dish. My scissors sit in the top drawer on the left side of my workbench. That's how I've always worked, methodical and precise. After I brought the doll home, I placed it in a corner of my studio on a short wooden stool. Its limbs were stiff but flexible enough to position. The face looked a bit dirty, so I planned on cleaning it. There was a small tear on its shoulder, and I wanted to patch it up. I noticed the cloth had some discoloration, and I thought I could restore it with the right materials. That was all I had in mind. I never expected things to get so weird. On the first night after I brought the doll home, I fell asleep around midnight. I was excited about some new designs I had in mind for the next morning, so I went to bed thinking of fabric swatches and color palettes. A little before dawn, I woke up to a faint rustling sound in my apartment. My initial thought was that it might be the wind or a loose window. I got up, rubbed my eyes, and walked around to check the windows. Everything seemed fine. I noticed my studio door was slightly open, which was strange because I always close it. I pushed the door open and turned on the light. My tools were in disarray on the workbench. My seam ripper was on the floor. Some spools of thread were knocked over. But what really caught my attention was the pair of scissors. They were lodged into a block of foam I use for upholstery practice, standing there like someone had stabbed the foam on purpose. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I told myself I must have left the scissors that way, though I was almost certain I had them in the drawer. I glanced over at the doll on the stool. It looked the same as before, lifeless, arms dangling, head tilted to one side. Its eyes seemed to catch the light in a weird way. That realistic face made me uneasy, but I forced myself to ignore it. I put my tools back, closed the studio door, and went back to bed. I tried to calm my nerves by telling myself I probably got sloppy with my organization. The next day, I worked on a small sewing project. I had the doll on my mind, but I didn't do anything with it yet. I had orders from customers that I needed to finish first. I noticed I was more on edge than usual. Every tiny noise in my apartment made me pause and listen. I tried to brush it off. I was sure I was letting my imagination get the best of me. When I finally got around to looking at the doll, I checked its limbs more carefully. The joints were sewn at odd angles and the stuffing felt lumpy. The face had these glassy eyes that almost seemed to track me as I moved around. It gave me an uncomfortable feeling, so I placed a cloth over its face while I measured the tear on the shoulder. At one point, I felt a strange shiver running through my arms. I had this weird sense of being watched, like there was another presence in the room. I noticed goosebumps on my forearms, but nothing else happened that day, so I ignored it again. Late that night, I collapsed into bed. I felt restless, so it took a while to drift off. Sometime around 1 in the morning, that faint dragging sound came again. It was like fabric scraping across the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up and listened, trying to figure out if it was just my imagination. The sound stopped. I walked carefully toward my studio. My pulse pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. The door was open again. I turned on the light. The doll lay on its side near the workbench like it had toppled off the stool. I stared at it for a good minute. My mind spun. How did it fall that far from the stool? It wasn't just a foot away. It was almost across the room. I lifted it up, checking if maybe the stool was unsteady, but the stool was firmly in place. I had no explanation. I set the doll back, turned off the light, and closed the door firmly. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. In bed, I kept my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I felt a lingering sense of dread. My brain went through 100 possibilities. Rats, maybe. Could a draft have knocked the doll over? None of it made sense. The sound I heard wasn't just an object falling. It was a scraping, dragging movement. I realized my hands were trembling. I forced myself to breathe slowly and tried to sleep again. When the alarm woke me up in the morning, I was drenched in sweat. The following few days, I noticed small changes around the studio. Pins on the floor, thread unwound. My measuring tape looked twisted and spread out across the table. Each time I walked in, my stomach clenched. I hated that feeling of not knowing what was going on. I kept telling myself maybe I was overworked. Maybe I was losing track of how I left things. One afternoon, I decided to move the doll to a cardboard box. I was tired of seeing it in plain sight. I wrapped it in some bubble wrap and placed it inside the box so it couldn't just roll out if the stool got bumped. I put the box in the corner behind some fabric rolls. That made me feel slightly better, at least for a few hours. When night came, I felt uneasy. I left my bedroom door open a crack so I could hear any odd sounds. Around 3 in the morning, I heard it again. That slow, muffled, dragging noise like something rubbing against the floor. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst. I jumped out of bed, grabbed the small flashlight I keep on my nightstand, and crept toward the studio. My breathing was rapid, and my palms felt clammy. I didn't turn on the overhead light right away. I shined the flashlight around. The box in the corner was on its side, opened. Bubble wrap was scattered, torn in places. The doll stood upright near the door, angled toward me. My chest felt tight. My hands shook. I flicked the light switch on. The sight made my skin crawl. The doll was propped against the doorframe as if it had been walking toward the exit. Its cloth arms hung at stiff angles, and its head was tilted forward, like it was trying to hide its face. I couldn't make sense of it. My first thought was that I was dreaming. I stepped back, but my mind was too clear for this to be a dream. My body tingled with fear. I wanted to pick it up and throw it away right then, but a small part of me was terrified of touching it. I forced myself to approach. My feet felt heavy. I grabbed the doll by the torso. Its fabric felt cold, which was strange because the room wasn't cold at all. I shoved it back into the box, slammed the lid shut, and dragged the box out of the studio, down the hall, and into the living room. My mind raced with questions, but all I cared about was putting distance between that thing and my workspace. I placed a heavy stack of magazines on top of the box, then went back to bed. I didn't sleep, though. I stared at the ceiling until morning, heart hammering, every noise making me jump. The next day, I tried to get some sewing done, but my hands kept shaking. I kept thinking about the doll in the living room. I debated tossing it in the dumpster, but part of me felt uneasy about it. I had brought it here. It was my responsibility to figure out what to do. Around noon, I decided to peek inside the box. I removed the magazines, lifted the lid, and saw the doll inside. It was on its back, arms at its sides. The face stared up at me with that same weird realism. The eyes seemed fixed on mine. My throat felt dry and I swallowed hard. I slammed the lid back down. I realized I was scared to even keep it in my apartment, but I didn't want to admit how serious this was. That night, I tried to block out the idea of more noises. I put the box in my hallway closet and locked the door. Then I forced myself to watch some random TV show, trying to keep my mind calm. Around 1 a.m, I started drifting off on my couch. At some point, I snapped awake. I felt like something was staring at me. My skin prickled. I glanced toward my hallway, and I saw the closet door open just a crack. My heart thudded so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stood up and walked slowly toward the closet. My legs felt weak. I placed my hand on the doorknob and pulled it open. The box was on the floor, the lid half off. The doll wasn't inside. My heart pounded. I felt my breath catching in my throat. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to stay composed. Then I turned around, shining my phone's flashlight into the hallway. Nothing. I moved back into the living room, shining the light under the furniture. Then I heard a gentle thump from the corner near my front door. I swung the flashlight beam around. The doll was right there, kneeling at the edge of the wall, arms slightly spread as if it had been pulling itself along the floor. I froze. I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. My scalp tingled. My first thought was to run out of my apartment, but I wasn't dressed for that. My second thought was to grab the doll and throw it outside. So I did. I forced myself to walk straight toward it, even though my entire body trembled. I picked it up and it felt heavier than before. My stomach flipped. I yanked open my front door and placed the doll outside on the apartment building's shared hallway, near a row of potted plants. Then I slammed my door shut, locked it, and leaned against it, panting like I had just run a mile. I didn't sleep much. I sat on the couch, lights on, staring at the door, half expecting the doll to slip through somehow. By the time the sun rose, I opened the door a crack and peeked into the hallway. The doll was still there, slumped against the wall, head tilted down. My heart hammered. I almost left it there for someone else to deal with, but guilt gnawed at me. I grabbed a trash bag from the kitchen, walked outside and slid the doll inside it. I sealed the bag, carried it downstairs, and stuffed it into the large garbage bin behind the building. My hands shook the entire time and my back felt tense. I wanted to wash my hands the moment I got back inside. I spent the next few days trying to forget about it. I ignored my sewing projects because every needle reminded me of the scattered tools in my studio. I spent more time in the living room. I watched TV without any real interest. I turned the volume up at night, hoping to drown out any strange thoughts. Occasionally, I thought I heard faint scratching noises at my front door, but when I checked, there was nothing there. I kept telling myself it was the wind or some neighbor passing by. I didn't want to dwell on the weirdness of that doll anymore. On the fourth day after I threw it out, I heard a knock on my door around noon. It was the building's maintenance guy. He said he noticed a strange doll in the trash. He knew I did crafts, so he assumed it was mine. I pretended I had no idea what he was talking about. He said someone else must have grabbed it, because when he checked again, it was gone. He asked if I had seen anyone rummaging around. I told him no, but my mouth felt dry and my stomach churned. I nodded him off quickly, trying not to let my anxiety show. That night, I forced myself to go back into the studio to finish some work that was overdue. I needed to focus on something other than my fears. I felt uneasy, but I kept telling myself the doll was gone for good. Nothing strange happened for a few hours. My tools stayed in place and the air felt normal. I started to relax. Around midnight, I started to pack up. I was reaching for the light switch when I heard a soft scraping sound in the hallway. It was so faint I almost thought it was my imagination. My heart began pounding again. I moved slowly toward the door, opened it a crack, and peeked out into the hallway. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I looked down. Something small and dark was on the floor near the living room. It was a torn piece of cloth. My mind raced. It looked exactly like the fabric from that doll's arm. It had the same discoloration, the same texture. I held my breath. I didn't find the doll that night. I stayed up, but nothing else happened. I felt trapped in my own apartment, tense and jumpy. For a full week, I kept expecting to see that doll crawling across the floor or kneeling in a corner. I kept my kitchen knives in a locked drawer just in case. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that realistic face, those open eyes staring at me. I kept hearing that faint dragging sound in my sleep, like it was coming from the walls or from under the bed. I've had enough. I haven't seen the doll again, but I know I'm not imagining what happened. Some nights I lie in bed with all the lights on, waiting for the slightest noise. I don't talk about it with anyone, because I'm worried they'll think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but the memory of that thing kneeling at my door doesn't feel like a mere dream. Every time I walk into my studio, I check the corners first. I keep my tools locked in a cabinet. I don't want to take any more chances. That's where I stand now. I wish I had some neat explanation for all of this, but I don't. I'm trying to move on with my life, focus on my craft projects, and pretend the doll never existed. Sometimes, though, when I close my eyes at night, I see it on its knees, arms stretched out, waiting for me to find it again. And I can't shake the feeling that one day, I might open a closet or walk into a dark room, and it'll be there, staring right at me. I'm not sure what I'll do if that happens. For now, all I can do is keep my guard up and try to sleep with the lights on. I walked into that studio on a Sunday afternoon, thinking I'd scored the best deal in town. The ad promised a furnished space in a decent neighborhood, with utilities included. It looked like an easy choice for someone like me, trying to keep expenses low without ending up in a rundown place. Right from the start, though, something felt off. There was this old mirror hanging on the wall, and I remember feeling a cold draft the second I stepped in. It wasn't a gust of wind, and it wasn't the air conditioning. It was like a low-level chill that settled at the base of my spine. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake that strange sensation every time I glanced at the glass. I told myself it was just nerves from moving into a new place, but it never got better. The landlord met me at the door and gave me a quick tour. He pointed out the small kitchen, the bathroom to the right, and the living area that doubled as a bedroom. Everything seemed functional. The furniture was basic, a small couch, a coffee table, a bed tucked in the corner. Then there was that mirror on the main wall, the one facing the front door. It had an ornate wooden frame with a few scratches around the edges. The glass looked a bit cloudy, maybe from age or poor cleaning. The landlord said nothing about it, and I didn't ask. I just figured it came with the place, part of the furnishings. That first night I kept noticing the mirror whenever I walked by. At first I thought I was just focusing on the reflection out of curiosity. Maybe it was interesting to see how it made the room look bigger, or how the frame caught the light. But the more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. There was a slight discrepancy in the way the reflection showed the darkness in the corners of the room. It seemed a bit too dark, like the mirror was absorbing extra shadows or something. I tried not to dwell on it. I put on the TV, thinking a little background noise would calm me down. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch. By the second day, I noticed a pattern. Every time I walked past the mirror, I felt this urge to look. It was like a reflex, but also like something was drawing me in. Late in the afternoon, I was getting ready to head out. I stopped in front of the mirror to check if my shirt was wrinkled. It looked normal, but I swear I saw a slight movement in the corner of the reflection near the ceiling. It wasn't big, more like a flicker. I turned around to check if a light was flickering behind me, but the overhead bulb was steady. There was nothing else that could move. I chalked it up to my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. That same night, I woke up around 3 in the morning with a weird feeling in my stomach. The air in the studio was stale and a bit too warm. I got up to open the window a crack. As I passed the mirror in the dim light from the street lamp outside, I thought the reflection looked darker than the actual room. It felt like I was looking into an underlit version of my space. My heart started racing. There was no logical reason for the reflection to look that way, but I convinced myself it had to do with angles or the faint lighting. I tried to go back to sleep, but I kept tossing and turning. On the third day, I decided to examine the mirror more closely. I tried cleaning it with a regular glass cleaner, thinking the cloudiness might just be old dust or grime, but the glass never fully cleared up. It still had that faint haze, like it was tarnished from within. I wondered if maybe there was a backing issue, but I didn't see any peeling. After a few minutes, I felt a strange tension in my chest, like my body was telling me to stop. I backed away and decided to leave it alone. I started noticing I was anxious about going home after work. I'd linger at the convenience store, or I'd take a longer route through the neighborhood, just to avoid stepping into the studio. When I finally got in, I'd turn on all the lights and pretend everything was normal. That old mirror still hung there, and the reflection still seemed slightly out of sync with the rest of the room. At times, the shadows in the corners looked like they were stretching out, especially at night. It was subtle enough that I questioned my own eyes, but strong enough that it made me uneasy. One evening, around 7, I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone. The TV was on low volume. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something shift in the mirror. It looked like a dark shape in the lower corner near the couch. My whole body tensed up, and I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. I looked directly at the mirror, and the shape was gone. I noticed my hands were clammy, and my breathing was shallow. I turned off the TV, walked over to the mirror, and stared at my reflection. It just showed me in the room behind me. I didn't see anything else, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I tried sleeping with the lights on. It didn't help much. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of a faint tapping. At first, I thought it might be the neighbor upstairs, but then it sounded closer. I got out of bed, every muscle on alert, and stood in the middle of the room. The tapping stopped. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming. Then I heard it again. 3 soft taps, like knuckles on glass. I spun around and stared at the mirror. The noise definitely came from that direction. My mouth went dry. I inched closer, step by step, until I was about 2 feet away. I didn't see anything out of place, but I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. I reached out and tapped the glass softly. It felt cold under my fingertip. No sound came back. From that point on, my nights became even more restless. I started having trouble focusing at work. I felt exhausted, but also jumpy, like I was running on pure adrenaline. During the day, the mirror was less intimidating, maybe because of the sunlight. But as soon as dusk settled, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. My skin would prickle and I'd find myself checking the mirror constantly. It was like waiting for a storm to break, but the storm never fully came. After about a week, I decided to cover the mirror. I found an old sheet in the closet and hung it over the frame. Right away, I felt some relief. I couldn't see the reflection, and that gave me a break from the constant tension. But on the first night with it covered, I heard that tapping again. I sat up in bed and saw the outline of the mirror under the sheet. The tapping was soft but persistent, almost like it was testing me. I lay there, frozen, unable to move. Eventually, it stopped. When morning came, I took the sheet down, half expecting to see cracks in the glass or something worse. The mirror looked the same as always, old and dull. That day, I looked up local shops that might know about antique mirrors. I found a small antique store a few blocks away. The owner was an older guy who seemed knowledgeable, but I was too embarrassed to explain the real reason I was there. I asked how to remove the backing from an old mirror, or how to restore it. He said sometimes old mirrors use different materials that can cause discoloration or a hazy look. Then he tried to sell me some specialized cleaning solution. I ended up leaving without any real answers. Back at the studio, I sat on the couch staring at that mirror, feeling a tightness in my stomach. I decided to just ignore it for the rest of the evening. I put on headphones and tried to watch a movie on my laptop. Every so often, I'd look up and notice how the room's reflection looked a bit darker again. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead, like a warning signal. I told myself it was just me getting paranoid, but I couldn't relax. Later that night, around 2 a.m, I woke up with my heart pounding. The tapping was louder now. I heard 3 taps, then a short pause, then 3 more. It was rhythmic, almost like a pattern. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, flipped on the lamp, and stared at the mirror. Nothing moved. The reflection of my small bed and the lamp looked normal, but I could feel my chest tightening with fear. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breath. Then I noticed a dark shape in the reflection's corner near the ceiling. It was like a patch of shadow that didn't match the rest of the room. My mind started racing. I didn't see anything on my ceiling when I looked up, but in the mirror, it was there, almost blending into the corner. I felt pins and needles running down my arms. The shape didn't move, but I sensed it was aware of me. My knees felt weak, and I had to lean against the wall. I forced myself to turn away from the mirror and grabbed my phone. My first thought was to call someone, but it was late, and I wasn't sure what I'd say. I didn't want to sound unhinged. I also knew I'd probably freak out whoever I called, and I wouldn't have a rational explanation for what I was experiencing. So I just stood there, phone in hand, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. The tapping had stopped, but the presence of that shadow was still burned into my mind. Eventually, I walked around the studio, turning on every light. I even checked the bathroom, peeked into the closets, made sure the windows were locked. Everything was normal. The only thing that wasn't normal was that mirror. I sat back on the bed, staring at it from across the room, waiting for something else to happen. My heart wouldn't slow down. My mind kept cycling through thoughts of smashing the glass or throwing the mirror out. But I was afraid. I worried about what might happen if I actually broke the mirror. That fear made no sense logically, but it was real. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I left early for work. During the day, I felt slightly calmer, but as soon as I left the office, dread set in again. I stood outside my building for a while, checking my phone, trying to delay going inside. When I finally walked into the studio, the first thing I noticed was a chill. It felt colder than usual. I dropped my stuff and realized the mirror wasn't in the same position on the wall. It hadn't fallen, but it looked like it was hanging at a slight angle, as if someone had nudged it. My stomach clenched. I knew I'd locked up before leaving, so no one should have been inside. But there it was, tilted a couple of inches. I walked up to the mirror and tried to straighten it. When my hand touched the frame, it felt unnaturally cold. I pulled my hand back, almost expecting to see frost on my fingertips, but there was nothing visible. That's when I noticed a faint smudge in the corner of the glass. It wasn't a fingerprint. It looked more like a small dark stain. My heart pounded again. I rubbed at it with my sleeve, but it wouldn't come off. I felt a surge of panic and backed away, trying to catch my breath. The air felt heavy, like I was underwater. I sat down on the couch, pressing my palms against my eyes, telling myself to calm down. I was tired, stressed, and probably overreacting, but every cell in my body felt on edge. Finally, I got up and went to the bedroom closet where I kept a roll of duct tape. I decided to tape the sheet around the mirror, covering every inch of the glass so I wouldn't have to see it at all. As soon as I did that, I felt a small wave of relief. I told myself I would just live with a covered mirror until I could move out. This place was cheap, but the unease wasn't worth it. For a few days, the studio felt quiet again. I still heard small noises at night, but I convinced myself they were just regular apartment sounds. I avoided looking at the mirror and focused on my daily routine. Work, quick dinners, scrolling through social media, and going to bed. But deep down, I felt that something was still there, behind that sheet. My nerves stayed raw. I never fully relaxed. On the 5th night of keeping it covered, I woke up to a steady, slow tap. I glanced at the clock. It was around 3 in the morning. I turned on my bedside lamp, heart thumping. The tapping continued. I got out of bed and moved toward the mirror. The noise grew louder. It felt like it was coming from inside the glass, even though I couldn't see anything behind the sheet. My scalp prickled and sweat trickled down my back. I just stood there listening. The taps came in sets of 3 with a short pause in between. My mind started to race, but my body was rooted to the spot. Then, without warning, the tapping stopped. The studio fell silent. I pulled the sheet away from the mirror, feeling almost dizzy. The reflection looked normal at first, but after a couple of seconds, I noticed that same shadow in the corner. It was closer now, almost like it had moved a foot toward the center of the glass. I locked eyes with it, or with whatever shape that shadow had. My breath caught in my throat. I expected it to move again, or vanish, but it stayed there, lurking. I felt an electric jolt in my gut, like my fight or flight response was kicking in hard. My vision blurred at the edges, and I thought I might pass out. I forced myself to breathe in and out, slow and steady. I tore my gaze away and stumbled back onto the couch. My hands were shaking so badly that I had trouble holding my phone. I wanted to leave right then and there, maybe crash at a friend's place, but I didn't know who would be awake. I also felt ashamed, like I was losing it over a mirror. But I couldn't deny what I'd just seen. That shadow was there, and it was definitely closer than before. I stayed up the rest of the night, lights on, TV on low, trying to distract myself. My heart rate eventually settled, but every time I glanced at the mirror, that shape seemed to shift slightly. It never left the corner, yet it felt like it was inching its way forward, ready to break through. I didn't dare look too long. I kept my focus on the TV, on my phone, on anything else. In the morning, I got dressed, grabbed my keys, and left for work, barely glancing at that damned mirror. But I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I made a decision to start looking for another apartment, even if it cost more. I'd pack my stuff gradually and find a way out of this place. Whatever was in that mirror, I wanted no part of it. I felt a sense of urgency. Like the next time I looked, it might be right behind the glass, staring at me up close. I had no intention of waiting around to find out if it could cross over. All I wanted was to get out, leave that mirror behind, and try to forget those dark corners that seemed to reach out whenever the lights were low.